downtown San Francisco. This is 95.7 The Game.
Good morning, everyone. Alongside my man, Evan Giddings, this is Devone, and welcome to another edition of Warriors This Week. And what a week it was, as the Golden State Warriors still remain one of the hottest teams in the NBA. However, they see their 6-game winning streak coming to an end at the hands of the Dallas Mavericks in exciting fashion. The Warriors with an opportunity to walk it off and win it, but a Klay Thompson corner three was not to happen as the Warriors fall by 2. Final numbers 108-106. Ev, let's bring you right in. How did you see the week, and how did you think things ended with that tough loss to a Dallas Maverick team that played without one Luka Doncic?
Well, if you look at the full week, right? Last time we were together, they had the Spurs that night. Then you beat Dallas at home. You go get a win against Houston, which essentially secures your 10 seed in the Western Conference. So, overall, the week was fine, but it did leave a little bit of a poor taste in your mouth knowing what else happened around the association that night. And so if I told you you're getting a 1-1 split with a 5 seed that's arguably playing the best basketball of anyone in the West, you'd tell me, Dan, well, that's a pretty good result. But because of where the Warriors have been, unfortunately, with the Pelicans losing, they're now 4 down in a row. The Kings losing back-to-back games last night in Boston by a point, which was a really close game. The Warriors legitimately had reason to believe they could, if they'd won last night, jump not just the Lakers, but maybe even the Kings to get to the 8. So as much as the week, I think, was a positive, and there's a whole lot else to dig into as far as storylines with the Wings. There's potential injuries. Kaminga missing 5 in a row. Wiggins was out last night. I think it was a missed opportunity in Dallas, even though it was one that came down to the wire.
And that's something where we can start, because it's a good area to sort of kick off the show this week, and that is their playoff and or play-in seeding. Mm-hmm. They have locked up the 10 seed. Now, I think mathematically with Houston losing last night, it's pretty much the Golden State Warriors are going in as the 10.
Yeah.
The question now becomes, can he catch the Lakers, who currently are 2 games in front of the Golden State Warriors, for that number 9 seed? The idea of jumping the Lakers and getting to the Kings, is that a possibility? Can they catch the Pelicans? The Pelicans, who are currently 3 games in front of the Golden State Warriors. As you mentioned, there was a golden opportunity to get within 2 of the Pelicans, within 1 of the Sacramento Kings. But first things first is you got to catch the Los Angeles Lakers. So oftentimes we talk about eating what's on your plate, and right now, as enticing as it is, and hey, Brandon Podziemski, after the first quarter or at halftime, and in his interview last night in NBC, was talking about their eye in the 6th seed. I think you can say goodbye to that after what took place last night with the Suns winning and the Golden State Warriors losing. You're now 4 back of that 6th seed behind the Phoenix Suns with only 5 to go. So realistically, I think, again, just do with what's in reason. And I think that when you talk about what's plausible, it's catching the Los Angeles Lakers, which sets up the big showdown on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Do you think ideally that's the way to look at things going forward, that it's pretty much the Lakers, and whatever happens from that point forward will take care of itself?
Yeah, I think so. But one point about Pods, he has such a strange confidence, or I don't know if it's just forward-looking or glass half full mentality. That comment at halftime reminded me of, I think it was around the turn of the new year. You remember when he had a bad game at home, went to the podium and said, basically, this game's on me. Like we lost this game because of me. And then Curry follows him at the podium, or Draymond is like, well, I appreciate that, Rook, but,
cut the drama, kid.
You're not one of the big boys yet. I thought a little bit about that when he said, we're still aiming for the 6. It's like, well, all right, buddy, you got to jump 3 guys. You got to jump 3 teams.
Well, he also said subtly and inadvertently in that interview how he's a point guard by basically.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. I mean, that's a sort of natural position. Go ahead.
No, Podziemski's already thinking like he's a 6-year vet, which I think is, in one breath, kind of funny, and also another breath, pretty cool. I mean, it just goes to show how confident the guy is. And I don't know, maybe it makes you feel better about him and his mentality going towards next season, where they may or may not have Chris Paul, but that's a future discussion. It does come down to Tuesday, and it kind of always has come down to Tuesday, especially after they beat them in LA on Saturday a few weeks ago. You just kind of pencil that last game and say, all right, that's going to be the one that could present you with the tiebreaker. The unfortunate issue about last night's game, Dan, is that there's a scenario now in which the Warriors could beat the Lakers in LA, get the tiebreaker, but still be the 10 seed, because you're still 2 games back. And as much as the Warriors have been playing really good basketball, what they've won 7 of 10, they've won 6 of 7. They're playing arguably their best defensive basketball of the season. The Lakers have quietly been taking care of business too.
They have.
And their schedule has been a little softer, I think, but it's almost like LeBron and the Lakers know all we got to do is just get that one game. Like, I haven't seen them been reaching as much as maybe the Warriors did last night. Like, Curry played 36 minutes. They basically had an 8.5-man rotation. Like, they wanted that game. And meanwhile, the Lakers, if you watch what they've been doing, they've kind of just been doing enough to get over on some of the opponents that they've had in front of them. So it's almost like they feel as if the 9 is theirs. And so the Tuesday game is going to be awesome. And I'm really looking forward to it because I think it's going to be a preview. But it might not be the one that ensures you the 9-10 game at Chase Center. But you got to get it. Like, every game is a must-win at this point, it feels like, for the Warriors, because if you go 5-0, might be tough, but if you go 5-0, there is still a legitimate chance at you getting even over Sac, perhaps, because it seems, Dan, like they're in free fall.
You mentioned the Los Angeles Lakers, very reminiscent of a year ago. Now, I don't think LA wants to go in as a play-in team, certainly, but sort of lurking in the weeds throughout the season last year and going through a lot of what it was that the Warriors dealt with, sort of the ebb and flow and a lot of the criticism that was heaped on LeBron James and sort of the load management. Now, LeBron doesn't come out of games necessarily, but he picks his spots. But they clearly put it into another gear last year and sort of came out of nowhere and went to the Western Conference Finals before getting smoked like everybody else by that of the Denver Nuggets. Mm-hmm. The Warriors... The difference between, I think, that Laker team and even Miami of a year ago, if you're thinking that could be the formula for the Warriors going forward, is that the Warriors are just much older. And the Warriors are so much older than that of Miami last year, which did the same thing in going not only to the Eastern Conference Finals, but going to the NBA Finals and taking on the Denver Nuggets. But that was a young basketball team. Now, Jimmy Butler's sort of in his mid-30s, but when you talk about Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Bam Adebayo, all guys in their 20s. So making that sort of analogy is tough, again, for a Warrior team that's in their mid to late 30s when you're talking about your core and your best players. I really think that that's what this gets down to. That even if you get in as, say they go in as the 10 or the 9 seed, you've got, we'll just say the 10 seed for the sake of conversation. You've got to play 2 games on the road. If you win those games, then in a quick turnaround of less than 48 hours, you got to catch a flight and maybe potentially you're going to Denver in the altitude and you're starting a 7-game series.
Yeah, I think also with those 2 examples, and Kerr was the one that brought him up, right? We want to try and be Miami or we want to try and be Los Angeles. The common theme between those 2 teams is also, in my mind, Dan, breaks. Like, they caught breaks to get as far as they did. And neither of them won the championship, but if the Warriors got to the conference finals, even they won a playoff series this year, I think that would be incredible in my mind with everything they've been through this year. But the Miami Heat caught a break in the first round. Sure, they were the 8th seed, but Chris Middleton got hurt in that series. Giannis missed a couple of games against the Bucks. Then you have an easier matchup in the second round. Boston's a team that, in my opinion, choked in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Lakers, meanwhile, get a first-round series against a Memphis team missing John Morant. And then you face a Warriors team that couldn't take care of business in Game 6 at home against Sacramento, so you have a rest advantage. Like, those are all the little details that I believe made the difference for both Miami and Los Angeles making the kinds of runs that they did, because eventually they ran into a team, or the same team, that steamrolled them. Like, the Lakers got swept in the semifinals. Miami essentially got gentlemen swept by the Denver Nuggets. And so, if you're under this guise that the Warriors can make a run, I do feel like at some point it comes to a skidding halt. The question is, how many breaks can they catch in the meantime? Because I think they're going to need that, whether it's to get through the play-in or to maybe get through a first-round postseason series. All of that is going to require something else not under their control going their way. And that may be the most, I don't know if it's disheartening, but kind of troublesome angle of this to me, because I don't feel like the Warriors, as great a basketball as they've played, their destiny doesn't seem to be determined by what they're doing. Like, I could tell you that they got the second best record since the start of February. They're 22-11. But because the Lakers have played well, because Sac's done enough, because Phoenix and the Pelicans and all the rest, everyone else is taking care of their own business, even though the Warriors look significantly better at this point in the season than they did 3 months ago.
I would say that luck is typically sort of you'll find, unless, Denver didn't need it last year, but typically sort of works its way into championship seasons. I think when you think about the Golden State Warriors when they won their first title, I don't know that they needed the luck, but when you go through that playoff run, remember just about everybody they faced was without their best player, including the NBA Finals where Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love go down with injury. So luck oftentimes works its way into it when you have those sort of special quote-unquote seasons. When you think about the Golden State Warriors this year, it's not so much about the luck to me as it is just they need the rest. Yeah. And we've talked about this, that more than any other team, probably in either conference, the Golden State Warriors needed that 6th seed because they needed that 6 days off. Again, more than anybody else. Mm-hmm. The Warriors needed nearly a week off. This is more challenging. When you have to go to LA and then potentially on the road to New Orleans, and then even if you get through those, you're going to be on the road out to Minnesota or to Denver to start a 7-game series. That's just difficult. But let me just take you back to early in the week, and let's just get into the midst of that 6-game winning streak. Mm-hmm. What you saw with the Warriors playing against Houston, and just take this scenario and run with it for me, but if the Warriors were to get that rest, and when you saw against Houston, where there's remnants of a team that I've maintained all along could make a serious run in the Western Conference playoffs, are you with me in terms of watching their team at their best during that run, that this is a team that has turned the corner, whether it's defensively or finding that identity offensively, that looks as though they're prone to make that deep run? Now, Denver has separated themselves from the rest of the class as far as I'm concerned. But again, this gets back to rest. Now, I'm saying in the perfect world, if you had 6 days off and the Warriors were to take on the OKCs and the Minnesotas of the world, what you saw at their best during that 6-game winning streak, do you think that's viable as far as making that run?
Yeah, I think the Warriors just on paper look dangerous, but you look in the standings and you see them being in danger kind of deal. So, like, for example, Dan, I think we would look at this Warriors team as viable to make a run if this was 4 years ago and the Warriors were an 8th seed and they got in. Like, they were just guaranteed a first-round series. It could be against Denver. It could be against a top 3 seed. I think that there would be a lot more optimism for their chances in the postseason because we knew that, number one, they'd be guaranteed at least 4 cracks at it. Secondly, you would have that built-in week of rest. Like, the path right now, and that's why last night it was a great game. It was hard fought. I know both sides were missing players. Doncic was out for Dallas, also Derek Lively, but then the Warriors are missing their 2 wings, and I do want to dig into them in a little bit as well. But that's why that loss hurts, because if you have a chance to get essentially any sort of built-in rest, and that to me is why the 8th seed, Pajemski brought up the 6th, but the 8th seed was always the goal for me, for this team. A month ago, 2 months ago, try and do whatever you can to get to the 8. Because if you can win that first game, well, then you build in an extra 3 days of rest. And that's been most important for this team than anything else because their best players are old. Now, you're probably going to have to play basically how you've been playing the last 3 weeks, which is game, day off, game, day off, game, day off, game, day off. And you're going to have to do that for another 2 weeks when you've already been doing it for 3 weeks. So I do wonder how people are looking at them now because I feel like that loss almost secures them in the 9-10. And do you think that rest for this team is more important than a home game? Like, being the 9, like you shouldn't essentially chase the 9 at the expense of playing Curry 35 minutes, I don't know, 3 of the last 5 games. Trying to get those wins, going for those wins might help you get to the 9. It might help you jump Los Angeles, but do you do it at the expense of running potentially your older players into the ground? I mean, that's why I think not having Wiggins and Kaminga last night, and if they don't have them, is going to hurt even more because they will have to play their older players. But from the standpoint of what is more valuable, I guess it's the whole rest or rust conversation we usually bring up at Week 18 for football. But I think you're right. For this particular Warriors team, rest is everything.
And when you think about last night's contest, you could clearly see, at least to me, that in that fourth quarter, in the waning moments, that was a gut check game. And despite the loss, I think the Warriors showed a lot of character. And I hate that word because I get it. When it comes to professional, well, it's about wins and losses. I understand, man. Like, yeah, we played well.
You a moral victory guy, Dan?
Yeah, people are like, we can take a lot away from that. No, you lost. And that's all this comes down to. That's professional sports pretty much in a nutshell. Yeah. Win the damn game. But the Warriors were on fumes, man. I mean, it's not only like a day off, play a game, but it's the travel, having to go back to Texas after coming home for guys who are in their mid-30s on the back end of a back-to-back. You could just see, like, they got through Houston, but they had to reach down. And the old analogy of a boxer, that was, back in the day, they used to fight 15 rounds. That was a 15th round, and it's just, what do you got? Can you reach down? Can you just dig something out and just get us through the finish line? The Warriors clearly had no speed. They had no movement, no legs, and they just were gassed. Even the kids. And this is sort of a testament to overstate the obvious to Steph Curry's greatness, that he had, I think, sort of a game that typified the Golden State Warriors. He was just off. And in the closing moments, they have that championship pedigree. They're like, we need to win this game. I got 2 bloody eyes. I can't breathe out of my right lung. I got a cracked rib. I'm going toe-to-toe with this fighter. I got to reach down and knock him out. And they were right there. I think that game, the culmination of all the travel and the difficult road trip and the difficult scheduling because of the death of their assistant coach and everything that they've had to deal with, just really caught up with them in those closing moments against Dallas. Yet, instead of, because it was that proverbial fork in the road, you could just tuck it away and just, live to see another day, just let Dallas win this thing going away. But down 9 with about 2.5 minutes to go, for them just to somehow get off the mat and have a shot to win that thing, I think spoke volumes to a certain degree.
No, it did, but you're right. Like, obviously, the tragic passing of Milojevic built in a little rest for the Warriors at the time, and I think that's partially a reason in addition to, I don't know, just, an emotional, kind of unquantifiable surge you can't really figure out. But unfortunately, that's a game last night where that event comes back to bite you from a schedule standpoint. You played that game on Tuesday because you didn't play it 2 months ago, which means that you would have had before this back-to-back 3 days of rest. But instead, you have one, you got to play hard on Tuesday because you need to beat Dallas, and then you obviously got to play hard against Houston. They took care of business against the Rockets. But that means that you're right. Like, Andrew Wiggins sprained his ankle at the end of the Houston game. Jonathan Kaminga has knee tendonitis in both of his knees. And that's, I think, less a long-term thing for me or a long-term concern than it is just a reality that when you play so many games in a condensed amount of time, like by the end of the season, they will have played 17 games in 30 days. They got 5 more games in their final 8 days of the season. That altogether, it's a lot. Like, imagine a baseball team is playing 2 doubleheaders a week. Like, eventually you're just going to be taxed and you're going to be running on fumes. Now, fortunately, last night, and what I think we've seen is that there is a second gear or even third gear that the Warriors and specifically their aging members are able to get to. Like, I thought last week in Florida, Chris Paul looked old. Last night, Chris Paul might have been their best player for stretches in that game. Steph Curry didn't have a great shooting night, but he turned it on in the fourth quarter. I know he missed the go-ahead shot with 30 seconds left, but he hit a huge three to shave it to 1. He obviously hit the clutch basket to tie the game. My question is, like, I guess how often can you expect that for them to have their on game versus their off game? Because that's another thing we also saw last year in the postseason was like Klay Thompson might have a good game here, but then he's going to be off the next day because he's tired, or Draymond Green or Steph. And those veteran players are still that they're going to take him as far as they go. Like, I love Pajemski. I love Trace Jackson-Davis. I love even Kaminga. But at the end of the day, they're there to kind of, I guess, push or aid or take the load off the shoulders of the guys who've been carrying the torch for 15 years.
But if you really think about this, is we're now obviously living in the here and now as to what the Warriors need to do to get in as the 10 seed, potentially procure the 9 or leapfrog some teams to get in as the 8 or the 7. And it's all about, the next 5 games. But really, wasn't this all set up like months ago? Those games the Warriors gave away against Sacramento.
Yeah.
The loss to OKC. All those games where they squandered huge leads were typically with Steve Kerr and Golden State Warrior basketball teams in this nucleus do not lose. Isn't that essentially where we're at? Isn't that sort of what laid the foundation as to the world we're living in right now?
No, definitely. There was someone who texted in last night and just during postgame and said, because I don't know, my kind of big takeaway from the game was it was a missed opportunity, right? You could have closed the gap in the West. Like, damn, they haven't been outside of the 9 or 10 for what feels like eons. You know, they haven't been a top 8 seed, I think, since November. So that was a chance to get close, and they couldn't grab the game. So someone just texted in, missed opportunities has been the theme of the season. And it kind of got me thinking, like, I can't refute that. You know, as much as I believe the Warriors are playing good basketball and they've looked solid, especially in the defensive end. I think you would agree they've looked like a far better defensive team after the All-Star break than before. But you mentioned the OKC game. Actually, 2 of them. 2 late threes that sent into overtime in which they lost those games. Obviously, the Denver, 16-point blown lead with 8 minutes left. Sacramento down by 22, or up by 22, lost that game. There was a game against the Clippers in Los Angeles in which Paul George hit a 3. That was the only time they led in that game was in the final seconds. You could just go down the list. Heck, they lost to the G League Miami Heat team coming out of Christmas Day. They lost to a Mavericks team during that home stretch. They got beat twice by New Orleans and Toronto. We got booed in back-to-back games. Like, there are games that you look at now and say, damn, if we'd have 2 or 3 more wins, well, then we're not talking about the 10 seed. Like, we are talking about the Warriors' dark horse potential. So last night was, I think, a culmination of the bed that they've made throughout this entire season. The question now is, well, do you look at it as this is who they are currently, or the entire season is who they are? Because I think they're a very different team from game 1 now to game 77.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. Because, and I'm sure we'll get into it in Warriors this week coming up in the next 2.5 hours, but we always go off season. What are we going to do? Mm-hmm. And I think, those decisions were a lot easier to make, or at least to me, when you were assessing the Golden State Warriors, say, just 2 weeks ago or even a month ago. Now, when you think about, okay, look how well they're playing during this streak. They're doing it with this core. They're doing it with defense. Is it as easy to say that, and I was a big proponent of blowing it up, and I still am, but it is, it's interesting to note that it is Klay Thompson, it is Steph Curry and Draymond Green that are the catalyst, including Andrew Wiggins, of this recent turnabout. So I guess it becomes a little bit more challenging, or do you have to rethink or assess a little bit longer if you're the GM of the Golden State Warriors and you're Dunleavy and you're saying, okay, well, what was a no-brainer just a month ago, now maybe I need to think a little bit longer in terms of what it is that I'm going to do with this core, because they're showing signs that they can do this. Whereas to me, the decision was much more imminent, just as short as a month ago.
And the number is 888-957-9570. I don't know, Dan. It's always funny, like, we feel, and this team has felt like it's in a different place every time we speak. Is there part of you that thinks that they might run this thing back?
Oh, God, no. I mean, there is, but you can't. You can't. And if I
don't know.
And if you're going to tell me that we're doing this show next year and they're in a 5-game losing streak and they start slipping, and you're going to say, well, they just got teased at the end of the season because they put together that win streak and now these guys are a year older and we ran this back. This has got to be the stupidest thing the Warriors have done in years.
Well, I think there's going to be minor differences, but essentially, okay, so in my mind, running it back would be, the big 3 are still here, and I think that's what is probably going to happen, because I think there's a number they're going to come to with Klay Thompson, unless someone, I don't know, forks over $30 or $35 million a year for him, which is plausible.
Klay Thompson's number's got to be close to 20 for this to make sense for them. Anything more than that, then I'm.
But they offered him 24 this last offseason.
Yeah, but I get that. That was this last offseason, and now he's a year older. Now he's coming off the bench predominantly, and so he's not worth the 24 to me. But go ahead.
Well, no, but I think there's also, and it's just like there is kind of a, I don't know, like a Hall of Famers tax in a sense. Now that might be that might set you back, but Klay Thompson is making $43 million this year, so that's what he's accustomed to. I'm not saying he's going to get anywhere close to that, but to go from 43 to 20, that's a pretty steep decline. Like, I don't know if he feels like he's half the player. He might be. He's back in the starting lineup now, and he wasn't amazing last night, but he was really good against Houston, and that's probably who Klay Thompson is, right? He's going to have a good game. He's going to have a bad game. He might be great 1 of 3, 1 of 4. Who's to say? And he might decline even more next year. I just, to me, the running it back aspect of things is about what the Warriors have been over the last 35 games, and that might be enough to trick enough people to make those choices to bring them back. I'm curious what fans think.
Let's throw that out there. Do you bring back the core? Do you make wholesale changes over the offseason? If you're Dunleavy, what is it that you do? Do you get rid of Wiggins? Goodbye, Looney. Goodbye, Chris Paul. Do you think about moving off of Klay Thompson? Is Jonathan Kaminga back on the trade block to bring in that big-time score to offset Steph Curry? Or are you buying into what it is that you saw with the Golden State Warriors over the last 2 weeks? This 6-game winning streak, that they still can do it, that there's still another gear that they can reach down to. Do you believe that the Golden State Warriors, as currently constituted, is the way to go going forward? We'll kick that around. And also, Ev, you mentioned Klay Thompson. I do want to talk about Klay, who had an opportunity to, man, that would have been huge if he nailed that 3. But here's something. Does Klay have the clutch gene? I see you on the phone lines. Hang in there, Michael, and the rest of the callers. We opened them up officially. You're ready to go. Go ahead and blow. 888-957-9570. That's 888-957-9570. You're stacking up. We'll get to your calls. Warriors this week. Evan Giddings, Dan Devone. Does Klay Thompson have the clutch gene? That and much more as we continue on 95.7 The Game.
Hi, I'm Henry Winkler. My eyes are very important to me. My eyes connect me with everything I love. I loved my late father-in-law dearly. He always lit up a room, but his vision dimmed with age. He had age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. And since partnering with Apellis, I've learned there's an advanced form of dry AMD called geographic atrophy, or GA. His struggle with vision loss made me want to help others know about GA's warning signs. For some, colors appear dull or washed out. For others, hazy or blurred vision make it hard to see details, like fine print on price tags. Many have trouble seeing in the dark, making driving at night difficult. GA gets worse over time and cannot be reversed. If you think you have GA, don't wait. Treatments are available. Ask a retina specialist about FDA-approved treatments for GA and go to GAWon'tWait.com.
Come into Friedman's Appliance in Pleasant Hill and see an amazing selection of Sub-Zero, Wolf, and Cove appliances live and on display in one of the largest living kitchens in the country. And save with Full Suite Savings Event. With qualifying purchase, get 3 additional years of protection or qualify for a $1,000 rebate. For the largest selection of Sub-Zero, Wolf, and Cove appliances, visit the Living Kitchen at Friedman's Appliance in Pleasant Hill or at friedmansappliance.com.
Business. It's all the things that keep this world turning. And behind every one of these companies is a partner helping to keep it all moving. It's why the local flower shop and your favorite pizza joint, the startup and the stadium, hospitals and hotels, banks and restaurants nationwide all choose the advanced network, cybersecurity solutions, and round-the-clock trusted partnership from Comcast Business, the company that powers more businesses than anyone else. Comcast Business, powering possibilities.
See why Comcast Business powers more small businesses than anyone else. Get started with fast speeds and advanced security for $49.99 a month for 12 months with a 2-year contract. Plus, ask how to get up to an $800 prepaid card with a qualifying internet package. Don't wait. Call or go online to switch today. Ends 5/5/24. Restrictions apply. New customers only with 50 megabits per second internet and security edge. Eagle Bill and auto pay required. Equipment, taxes, and fees extra.
Visit History San Jose, the South Bay's largest outdoor history museum. Located in Kelly Park, in downtown San Jose, the museum preserves the cultural heritage of San Jose and the Santa Clara Valley, from the early Spanish colonial period up to today's Silicon Valley. Sign up for the History Park Walking Tour, Wednesdays and Fridays, featuring a historical and architectural look at each building. Or just picnic with the kids. There is something for everyone at History San Jose. For more information, please visit historysanjose.org.
Listen for the latest ski, snow, and road conditions with the Toyota Tahoe Report every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday throughout this snow season with Johnny Mosley. Brought to you by your local Toyota dealers. Toyota, let's go places.
Are you looking for a rewarding career and opportunity to serve your community? The Alameda County Sheriff's Office is now hiring for both sworn and non-sworn positions. Alameda County Sheriff's Office has excellent opportunities for career advancement, competitive benefits, and for all new deputy sheriffs, hiring bonuses between $10,000 and $15,000. Don't wait to start making a difference in your community. Apply today at joinacso.com. That's joinacso.com.
The Morning Roast loves taking your phone calls each and every day. But if Bonte and Shasky think your take is ridiculous, be prepared to be flushed. Brought to you by Flowing Water Plumbing and Drain, the Bay Area's top pick for quality plumbing services.
As an educator, Mr. Nelson's teachings are still being quoted in schools.
Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world.
Mr. Nelson taught hope.
Everyone can rise above their circumstances if they are dedicated and passionate.
And giving our best efforts.
It's always impossible until it's done.
Mr. Nelson Mandela's teachings not only united a nation, they inspire us today. Inspiration. Pass it on from passiton.com.
Getting your biggest tax refund from Jackson Hewitt can lead to some spirited reactions.
Jackson Hewitt, yeah!
Jackson Hewitt is so sure they'll get you your biggest refund that if they don't, you get your money back plus $100.
Jackson Hewitt, yeah!
Switch to Jackson Hewitt and we'll beat what you paid last year, even if you filed online.
Yeah!
Ain't nothing to it. Switch to Jackson Hewitt and pay less for tax prep, guaranteed. Proof of prior year payment required when filing. New clients only at participating locations through April 7th. Terms at jacksonhewitt.com.
Baseball is back, basketball is heating up, and the NFL Draft is right around the corner. Listen to the latest on the teams you love with the free Odyssey app. The biggest sports radio stations in the country, providing unrivaled local coverage of their teams, all in one place. Exclusive interviews with players, coaches, and team executives, streaming live and always available on demand. Stay in the know with your favorite teams with Odyssey. AUDACY. Download the free Odyssey app today.
Don't miss your chance to see the Black Keys on their International Players Tour when they take over the Shoreline Amphitheater.
Now back to Warriors Live on 95.7 The Game.
Evan Giddings and Dan Devone, welcome back to Warriors This Week Live.
Warriors This Week is live.
Yeah, I was going to say, man, what are you doing to me? So, Ev, first of all, let's take a quick look at the schedule. The Warriors got the Utah Jazz back at home. That should be a penciled win. Everything huge from here on out. Yeah, that's dangerous to even go there, right, when you're talking about the Warriors this year. And then, of course, it sets the stage for the big one in L.A. when they take on the Los Angeles Lakers with the number 9 seed potentially at stake. But as you mentioned, even if you win that game, there are no guarantees that you get the number 9. And then another potential, which should be a win against the Portland Trail Blazers. And then it's the Pelicans, another huge game of a team that right now is sitting in front of the Golden State Warriors at that 7 seed. The Jazz wrap up the season with the Golden State Warriors at home. So 5 games remain. Right now, they're 2 back of the Los Angeles Lakers for that number 9 seed. As we've been discussing, and we'll get to the calls coming up in a matter of moments, what do you do during the offseason? Now, I can't waver from this, this point of mine that you've got to make some wholesale changes, some significant changes, simply because this team is just too old and too small. But you seem to think that at least the core and pretty much what it is that we're witnessing right now is going to be intact and back with the Golden State Warriors next season.
I think there's a strong possibility that the wholesale changes that a lot of people want, including you, and at times during the season, including me, I don't think they're going to be there. And one of the reasons is I'm not sure if there's a move out there worth kind of deconstructing or retooling this roster. But secondly, with how they've played over the last now 2 months, I think there are people inside the organization that believe there's enough of a sample size to say, look, we're playing close to 65% winning basketball. Over 82 games, that's a 54-55 win pace. if we didn't have suspensions, if we didn't have injuries, if we didn't have ups and downs from players that are wrestling with their age and agendas, next year, if we come back in a cleaner, I don't know, more positive mindset, why couldn't we be one of those top 8 seeds? Why couldn't we challenge, for a first round postseason series? Because it's a weird place they're in, right? Last year they made the second round, which I don't think they're going to get to this year. But they're going to have more wins in the regular season than they did last year. So they could be a 47-win team and be the 10 seed. Last year they were a 44-win team and they were the 6. In your mind, Dan, and I think this is the question they have to answer, does that mean that you've had a better year than last year? Does that mean you're closer to your eventual goal, which is to win a championship? And I think that's just a tough one to answer, but combined with, I don't know, their age, some of the value for their players that you would want to deal, I don't know if there's a wholesale change out there that's worth totally moving off of a team that is technically, like, in my opinion, they're better than they were last year, but they're not going to get as far. And I don't know, like, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place from that standpoint. So in general, I don't think there's going to be as many wholesale changes as people want.
What it tells me about the Golden State Warriors as it relates to their record this year is that the West is not only good, but getting better. Because when you think about the top of the West, they are so young. And so what happens is that they're just going to get older and they're going to get more experienced. Think about the Sacramento Kings, for crying out loud. The Sacramento Kings were the 3 seed last year. They're potentially going to win more games this year, and they're hanging on for their lives as the number 8 seed, trying to stave off, both the Warriors as well as the Los Angeles Lakers. So it's not so much that, yes, the Golden State Warriors, it's a team that's done some good things towards the end of the season, but you're not getting any younger. This isn't Benjamin Buttons, man. You're not reversing the age clock. So it's more a testament to the Western Conference, especially when you talk about the top tier, as they get older and more experienced and more dangerous. Meanwhile, the Golden State Warriors just become older and closer to the age of 40. The phone lines are now officially open at 888-957-9570. We start things out in Oakland. We kick it off with Michael. Michael, what do you got?
Okay, man. I'm only looking at it 2 ways. If 10th spot is what we're going to be in, then let's start resting Steph. You take Keonis and you put it in for Steph. You take maybe Dario Saric if he's healthy, or take Santos and put him in for Draymond. Just, get those guys the day off that way. Still keep the core playing, but not so much playing. If you're going to go, if you're going to say, okay, we're going to settle for the 10th seed. But if you're not going to settle for the 10th seed, you can still do the same thing, play them and rest them that way as well. That's just my opinion. And I do think Klay Thompson can be clutch. He just wasn't last night. Thanks, fellas.
Thanks, Michael. And while I think that certainly makes sense if you think about it on paper, I don't think there's any way in hell you could tell Steph Curry, listen, you got to sit some of these games out. We'll resign to the 10 seed. And or Klay Thompson or Draymond Green. That competitive nature is just not going to fly with these guys.
No, and look, unless there's some sort of scientific data you can present them that is going to prove to them that resting is the way to go, I don't think it's going to happen. Now, if there's something precautionary they're dealing with, they might be inclined to sit one out, which is, I think, probably how they're dealing with Kaminga. Although that is a little weird, a little funky in my mind, Dan. The fact that he's missed 6 games, but the last 2 he's missed after Kerr said he was going to be back for.
Yeah, he played in those 3-on-3 games, right?
Yeah, so on Tuesday night, Kerr said Kaminga's going to be out, but that he'll play on Thursday. And then on Thursday, he was questionable, and then he didn't play. And then last night, I guess he warmed up, but he decided not to play. It sounded like Kerr got from Kaminga that he didn't feel ready. So there's something going on there that I thought I'm monitoring. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting scenario, not only with his health, but even when he's ready to come back. What are you doing now? Because obviously they have found something with Draymond Green and Trace Jackson-Davis, right?
Yeah.
Like defensively, Draymond is a different guy when he knows there's somebody else that's got his back that can protect the rim and it doesn't have to be him. So does Trace Jackson-Davis go back to the bench? I don't think that's a very popular move. I think there's a lot of decisions that have to be made once JK is available. All right, off to San Jose. Austin, my man, Michael beat you as our first caller here on Warriors this week. Usually we kick things off with Austin, who always comes strong with good insight. What the hell was wrong with you, Austin? You're a little slow at the trigger today.
Listen, Michael was strong, though, I must say, and I tend to agree with him. Just on a quick comment on that, I think that, if you're saying the 10th seed is what it is, I think you do got to start resting the veterans. I mean, you're not going to move a lot more. You're not going to slip because Houston's done now. So I totally agree with you. You got to find a way. As for the veterans protesting, listen, guys, I go back to what I said a couple weeks ago, Dan. I don't know if you guys agree, but I don't know how crazy these veterans are about playing the playing game anyway. And I still say that they're going to do it because they have to. But if you ask me if Steph, Dre, and Gray, and even LeBron James, these guys hate the play-in format, man. I mean, they don't want to. They like 7-game series, man. If you're a vet, you want to play in a 7-game series because you got a lot more time to rest and react. But this one-and-done thing is a mess for them. So I just something to monitor. I am worried about the JK thing. Evan, to your point, I think there's something more going on. I'm worried because a guy at his age, you kind of wonder, 6 games down the stretch, he's not playing. Man, I just hope to God it's not something more with his health. But my conspiracy side of it, and here's where you get a little weird, my conspiracy side of it wonders if could they be saving him, resting him, not wanting to play him because, hey, they're going to trade him. You know, you don't want to have a hurt guy. You can't trade a hurt guy. So that's just a little bit of something to worry about. And the last thing, guys, I'm with you, Dan. No way do we bring back, and I've said this before, and I'm still sticking with it. The latest run has been good, but if you're telling me you're bringing back the same core next year, aging, come on, man. That's not going to get it done. The rest of the West is getting better, younger. The Warriors are going in the opposite direction, and I'm not even sure that our young guys, I keep saying, we love the young guys, and they're good guys, but are we sure these guys are the guys that are going to build us for winning championships or winning, even being in the top 3? Forget about championships. How about get to the top 3 or 4? Are we sure we have the infrastructure of guys that can get us there? I'm not sure, guys. That's just a couple comments I have. Enjoy the show.
Strong as always, Austin. I would say that, while these pieces aren't necessarily generational players, these aren't perennial all-stars when you think about Podziemski and Trace Jackson-Davis and Moses Moody, but they are good complementary pieces. And we'll see where the trajectory and where their career goes from here. But I think Podziemski, who had a big bounce-back game last night, he was very good. I think any team is better with, and the numbers prove this with the plus-minus with this guy, that this is a winning basketball player. And Trace Jackson-Davis just gives you height, man. That you cannot continue with this 6'5" average lineup, which is the smallest in the NBA, and having Draymond Green as your starting center and playing small ball with a bunch of guys who are on the wrong side of 35 years of age. That just doesn't make sense. So Trace Jackson-Davis, which really sort of leads me to, as we get back to Jonathan Kaminga, and we could talk about his health, and maybe there's something there. When this typically happens, I usually look at Rick Celebrini, who always errs on the side of safety, and usually these things happen because Celebrini is the guy who has the last word, is like, no, I'm sorry, I'm shutting it down, he's not ready to go. Kaminga may want to play, Kerr may want him to play, but Celebrini's usually the guy's like, he'll play when I say he plays. He has a very loud and strong voice within that organization. But there could be something there. Time will tell. But when JK is healthy, is he going back to the 3 spot? Is he going back to the starting lineup?
I don't think he's going back to the starting lineup, but I do think he's still essential to the closing lineup. And that's where a lot of people get lost in the weeds. We talked about it a ton this week. More Wiggins doesn't necessarily mean in a 48-minute game less Kaminga. We've seen Podziemski play 32 minutes off the bench. We've seen Clay play big minutes off the bench. We've seen Chris Paul play 31 minutes last night off the bench. Just because you're not starting doesn't mean you're not going to play. But that's a place where I do think Kaminga might be a little fragile. I mean, he's 21. Last year, he started a bunch of games when Wiggins was out, and then essentially had his starting spot vanish because Wiggins came back, went right back in. And even to this season, They had a 3-1 road trip without without Wiggins. He was out for personal reasons, and Andrew came right back into the starting lineup. So I know Austin is talking about they don't want to push him because they might want to trade him. I wonder if Kaminga's reading the tea leaves a little bit about how this team's been playing and is, I don't know, maybe dissatisfied with his assumed role when he returns. And maybe that's preventing him from, that might be reading too much into it. But in general, Dan, to your point about should Kaminga start when he comes back, I think the proof is in the pudding on the defensive end of the floor that he shouldn't. And it's not because Kaminga can't play defense. But to me, if you're talking about what's best for the team, the Warriors have been playing their best at the start of games or throughout the games when Draymond is at his best defensively. And when's Draymond at his best defensively? When he's at the 4. Because, and he's even talked about this over the last week, he can gamble a little more. He can play center field a bit more. He's able to make reads, knowing all while he's got a guy behind him that can block a shot, which when he's at the 5, he can't do. So it's less to me about Kaminga and, I don't know, taking care of his sensitivity than it is thinking about what's best for the team. And when they're at their best, they're playing defense. And so that's why I think he would come off the bench. And I think also just, too, when you move Clay into the starting lineup, you're devoid of a scoring threat off the pine. So that also makes sense because what does Kaminga do perhaps better than anyone except for Steph? He could score. He's a walking 20-burger. So I think it would be mutually beneficial to feature Kaminga's best part of or characteristics, but also get the best out of your starting 5.
But you're right. Where you started when you're talking about how emotionally fragile he can be when it comes to sort of a pride thing. We saw that earlier in the season, that I think just the idea of him coming off the bench, because he's been playing so well, it's not as though, there's any reason to demote him.
Yeah, like when Clay went to the bench, it wasn't shooting well. When Wiggins went to the bench, he wasn't scoring. He was inconsistent. To be fair, Kaminga hasn't done anything wrong. He just got hurt.
Yeah, he's a victim of sort of a numbers game. And again, I don't think that's going to sit well with him. Even though he knows it's the right thing to do. Maybe he recognizes that, with Trace Jackson Davis and what you just laid out, obviously Draymond Green much more comfortable when he can play center field and he doesn't have to rim protect. He doesn't have to watch Jokic. He can just do what it is that Draymond Green does best, and that is help, call out the defense, and just be that disruptor. But I do think that when you're talking about Jonathan Kaminga, as we've seen, he's going to see this as a demotion, and he's not going to be in a good frame of mind. He will not be happy. Now, that's where Steve Kerr, this is how you earn your money. You've got to sit him down, and you've got to be able to manage that and make sure that he doesn't crawl back into a hole, because you're going to need Jonathan Kaminga. We talk about an aging team. Well, he's everything but. He is young, he's athletic, and he goes rim to rim. You're going to need his youth and his athleticism. And as far as Andrew Wiggins is concerned, I wanted to go here. Remember when Andrew Wiggins came to the Golden State Warriors?
Oh, do I?
Remember the initial sort of reaction was, what a trade for the Warriors, and it was, right? He was so big 2 years ago in leading him to that NBA championship. But at the time, I think a lot of people knocked Minnesota because they said, well, listen, Minnesota at the time was a losing organization. They didn't know what to do. Minnesota's like, oh, well, he can disappear. He's a really enigmatic basketball player. We're done with him. People are like, well, you're Minnesota. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. Come to the Warriors. This is the proper culture. You don't have to be the number 1. We have Steph Curry. You don't even have to be number 2. You can be the number 3. It was Minnesota. Minnesota is one of those organizations that is a perennial loser. Like when they said that you disappear from time to time, it's simply because you're in the wrong environment. And he was so happy. He re-signs the contract. You know that we've seen him over a length of time? He's basically the same cat as he was in Minnesota. He's basically the exact same thing Minnesota forewarned the Golden State Warriors that this is a guy who disappears, bro. Yeah, he can be good, but he's sort of weird, and he crawls into a hole. He can be lethargic. He can be a guy that at times just, he'll disappear, go MIA for a week, even though he's in uniform. And as much as we knocked Minnesota for being that team that couldn't cultivate the proper culture to bring out a guy like that of Andrew Wiggins, I think in retrospect they were spot on.
No, they were. Look, the proof is in the pudding with Wiggins. He's more often, the lights are often on, but that little 10% glimpse of when the lights are on make you say, damn, this guy was the number 1 overall pick. This guy was a top player in high school and at Kansas and a number 2 player on a championship team. But it's interesting too, because if you remember correctly, when the Wolves made that deal, they attached the pick that became Kaminga. Like, they had to move a first-round pick to get off of Wiggins, and a pretty valuable first-round pick. Whether you think J.K. is great or is going to be what, like, that's a lottery pick that you had to attach. And the Warriors sent back a decent player as well, D'Angelo Russell, who's also helping the Lakers right now. But that was like an opportunistic trade. And actually, to bring it back to this offseason, and if the Warriors will make a wholesale change, or whether they're going to largely run it back. To me, I think the most viable move for them to improve and kind of shake things up is an Andrew Wiggins type of move. Now, not for that player specifically, but what I mean is an opportunistic trade where you see a player out there on the market or around the league that's a little bit of a project that might have fallen out of favor with a particular franchise that you might be able to get a bit cheaper, that you wouldn't have to attach anything to, but you're going to have to send something back. And that's where, to some people's points, that's where Kaminga might come in. Is someone might look at Kaminga and say, we think this guy's going to be really, really good. And the Warriors might look at Kaminga and say, well, if we're going to compete in the next 2 years, he might not be on our timeline. Do we want to attach him, bring other pieces back, and use Kaminga to turn him into, I don't know, your future number 2 on a championship team that you didn't see coming? Like when they traded for Andrew Wiggins, I thought that was a risk. I just did. There was not much about him in Minnesota that led me to believe that he could be the player that he turned into. And if you think he's turned into a pumpkin, I can kind of hear you. But with how he's played over the last 2 weeks, I think a lot of people have reverted back into that mindset of, damn, well, what if this guy could be this for a long period of time? It might be fool's gold, but I just think as far as running it back, in a way, I don't know if you can move Wiggins, and that's another reason why I think they might just kind of have the same core as they do this year.
Well, he has the contract, which makes it that much more difficult, but I think that in the perfect world, I just can't do the dance with him any longer. And he has been so instrumental, probably the one guy that you would point at and say, if you had to pick one player that's responsible for the turnaround and the win streak and now being relevant, I would say it's been Andrew Wiggins, who's been Andrew Wiggins again.
Him and Draymond.
And Draymond's defense. Well, Draymond is just, Draymond, it's almost as though it's a good thing when he gets, ejected from a game like that of Orlando, because you're going to get good Draymond for about a week or 10 days.
Justifying his behavior, Dan.
Well, that's who he is. I mean, at some point, and I said this when he went out, that's Draymond, and that's what you sign up for, is that, this guy is not healthy. He's not healthy in the head. And sometimes when that rage overtakes him, it could be 4 minutes into a game, it could be 4 minutes into overtime, but the rage is going to win. and that's Draymond Green. And you get the very, very good, but you also get a lot of bad. And so I think the Warriors sort of know that at this point. But again, he's been so very good in terms of the defensive turnaround. And you're right. I think that it wasn't coincidental that with, instituting, by the way, when I said Trace Jackson Davis needed to start. I know how many times I have told you, the listening audience out there, throughout the entire season when it wasn't popular that you needed to go the way of Pajemski. Trace Jackson Davis needs to get into that starting lineup. I said starting lineup on the show. You weren't here, and people were like, no. Well,
Devone's young at heart. He's young at heart. He loves the young guys.
But Trace Jackson Davis has been a difference maker, and so is Andrew Wiggins. But as good as he has been, and he may continue this throughout the playoffs, I have to be resolute when I'm like, I've seen too much of the other side. I've seen too many disappearing acts. And whether it's the personal issues, which I hope that you fix in your life, I can't make that commitment with you going forward. As difficult as that might sound, it might be unpopular because he could be very good from this point forward, but I can pretty much assure you of a couple of things. And that is Draymond Green will get some injections next year. He'll get technicals. And I can also assure you that there are going to be stretches throughout the season where Andrew Wiggins will disappear. And I cannot afford to continue to do that with you going forward. I can do it with Draymond Green because I know who Draymond Green is, and Draymond Green will make up for it. But in terms of your behavior, and as much as we rely on you and the teasing and as good of a two-way player that you potentially could be, I'm done with the dance.
Well, then I guess as we kind of move into our second hour here, I guess I'll just throw this out, 888-957-9570. Right now, who needs to start, Wiggins or Kaminga? And then moving forward this summer, who needs to stay? Do you look at it as black and white as that? Because I think there's a starting lineup decision that's going to have to be made, and perhaps it's on Sunday when you hope that both Kaminga and Wiggins are back, or maybe it's Tuesday in Los Angeles. Whenever they're both back, if they're fully healthy, there is a choice that Steve Kerr has to make of who starts, and maybe you start both of them and TJD goes back to the bench. I'm inclined to believe that's not going to happen. But in the immediate, if you're choosing between Kaminga and Wiggins in the starting five, who is it? And then this summer, if you're going to move off of one of them, who are you moving off of, Kaminga or Wiggins? Because I think there can be conflicting choices there, which to me is I would start Wiggins. I would also move off of him this summer. So if people feel the same, 888-957-9570. And if you think I'm full of hogwash, please let me know.
Hogwash is putting it gently. Also want to get into Klay Thompson. I teased it, but I didn't address it, so remind me again. Does he have the clutch gene? Is he a guy that late in games you feel comfortable with that's going to take you home? Does he have a little Steph Curry in him? Is Steph rubbed off on him? Or is he one of those guys that's sort of got like the Chris Webber gene? Timeout, as we talk about the NCAA and getting down to the NCAA championship. I'm still going with the Big Maple and Zach Edey. Ev, come on, man. Come around with big 7'4" in Purdue. Let's go. By
the way, did you see the most recent first-round mock draft for the NBA?
Where is he? He's in the first round, right?
He wasn't on it.
Oh, wow. That's a mistake.
Warriors might be able to get him in the second, Dan.
I mean, he could be a Nurkic, right? Or he could be like just a big fellow who's taking up space.
Taco Fall's on a roster somewhere.
All right, we continue. We'll talk about the Golden State Warriors and what do we do when JK is healthy? Is he going to the bench? Is he back in the starting lineup? We'll take it a step further. What do we do with him during the offseason? And also, clutch gene as it relates to Klay Thompson. Evan Giddings, Devone, Warriors this week continues right after this.
Next question.
Hey, it's Willard and Dibs for Safeway. Enjoy 3 amazing deals. And as always, earn 4 times reward points on hundreds of exclusive offers with your Safeway app. Driscoll.
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
Warriors lose last night at the hands of the Dallas Mavericks as they end a back-to-back Texas two-step, beating the Houston Rockets and solidifying the number 10 spot, but a golden opportunity with Sacramento losing, with New Orleans losing, a chance to gain ground on those teams in front of them. However, it was not to be as Klay Thompson came up short in the corner. We're kicking around. Evan Giddings and Dan Devone, welcome back to Warriors This Week. Does Klay Thompson have the clutch gene? We want to discuss that. We also want to get into the Wiggins and Jonathan Kaminga conversation. For that, we get out to Fremont. Let's bring in Suge, who joins us. Hey, Suge, how are you this morning?
Hi, good morning. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. Thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to comment on Wiggins. It sounds ideal maybe to get off of him this summer, but I have a comment about that. Only, you have Wiggins who sometimes plays well, sometimes he doesn't. So it's like a 50-50. But you tell me, if you get off of him, you have to get somebody who's a good, really good secondary scorer and who can defend well. And one more thing, this person has to be willing to come and play with 3 old guys. That is a big issue because someone who's young and who's that good may not want to come over here because they might find it better to go to another place that will definitely offer a chance to get a championship. That's my comment.
Well done, Suge. Yeah, I'm with you. That if you're going to give up Andrew Wiggins, you can't just do it for the sake of trading him, simply because, Evan and Dan are done with Andrew Wiggins. Let's move him out the door. But it's all about through the scope of what is it that you're getting in return, right? That's the only way you can look at this, is that how are you improving the basketball team? If it means, Ev, at the end of the day, that there is nobody suitable out there, there are no suitors potentially that are going to improve my basketball team by moving Andrew Wiggins, you may find yourself bringing him back. You don't just trade somebody simply for the sake of trading, and or you're not at the point where you're like, we'll eat the contract and let him walk. That doesn't make sense either. So there's a good chance that if it doesn't make sense to trade him because you can't bring value back, he could be on this roster next year.
Well, and that's why it's becoming increasingly more likely to me than it was even when they were in the midst of their 14-4 stretch in February, that it feels to me, Dan, like they might largely bring this core back next season. Not because they think that this core is all of a sudden going to, in Cinderella fashion, turn into a championship team, but because, one, there's not really a way to, from a whole scale standpoint, improve. Number two, they're 22-11 since February 1st. That's a .667 winning percentage. You extrapolate that over 82, that's a 54-50 win-win pace, 55 win pace. So the front office might be looking at the risk-reward of moving off of someone like Wiggins or trading Kaminga or not bringing back Klay, all the likes. But I don't know if there's a move out there, to Suge's point and to Caller's point that I brought in before her, that this is a team that is all of a sudden going to leapfrog 4 or 5 teams to get back into the top 4. I'm not sure that there's enough out there that you can get off of Wiggins and all of a sudden transform yourself into a team that you ideally want to become.
Well, I think the issue I would have with that premise is that when you're extrapolating this team over an 82-game schedule because they played well over a stretch, well, therein lies the problem. It's because they can't do it over 82 games. This is a team, especially when you get older, that is built to do it for maybe a couple of weeks, maybe for a month or two. But when you don't have the youth and the sustainability to do it over the course of 6 months or through the ebb and flow and the battle of attrition that is an entire NBA season, becomes really problematic. Because OKC is, again, they're only going to get older and more experienced. The same is applied to Sacramento, Minnesota, the New Orleans Pelicans, even teams behind the Golden State Warriors. When you think about, the Memphises of the world, and they're only getting older and better. So Golden State has to make some serious decisions going forward. Now, look at, maybe you don't move off of Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. Steph's not going anywhere, and Andrew Wiggins come back. but their roles have to be diminished. Like I think that you have to recognize that the youth on this team has to be more the centerpiece going forward, and that you've got to bring in some serious pieces. And even at that, I don't think you're contending for anything in the near future. I think that if you bring back the core and you let this younger generation of players on the Golden State Warriors get more experience while bringing in other players that are also getting better with, as younger players getting better with experience. And you're looking at, again, you're getting into a timeline of 2 to 3 years. And in terms of winning right now and winning a championship as Steph goes off to the sunset is not going to happen. The only way Steph, to me, if you were to fulfill that, that ideal sort of ending to his storybook career, if he's going to win another title or at least be in the conversation, you've got to bring back a star. You've got to bring back somebody who's giving you 25 and 10, who is a legitimate star in this league to go along with Steph, and then surround yourself with a Trace Jackson Davis and some of the kids. And everybody else is on the table who potentially could bring back that player. Now, is that plausible? I have no idea. But to me, that's sort of my outlook going into the offseason.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's another reason why it might be hard to completely reshuffle the deck, is because you have a lot of good young pieces. But do you think those young pieces are ready to completely shoulder the load? I would push back on that. I think they're ready to take some of the weight, but not completely carry the water of the older players on this roster. Like Steph still needs to play 30 minutes a night next year for them to be successful. I think Draymond probably still needs to play 25 to 30 minutes for them to be successful. Same with Klay Thompson. Maybe him a little less, more so. But do you have enough in the emerging young guys to fully believe that you could move off of Wiggins or not re-sign Klay? I think Chris Paul is probably gone for financial purposes. But as we saw last night against Dallas, Chris Paul is a pretty big piece of this team. So is Brandon Podziemski, who said at halftime, ready to play point guard? That's something you got to weigh too. If you think that Kaminga next year at age 22 is ready to take flight in a bigger fashion than he did this year, and he's ready to be a number one or number two on almost every night, well, then I could justify moving off of Wiggins, perhaps, because you think Kaminga's ready. I don't know if I've seen enough yet, and I don't know if the Warriors have seen enough yet. Even your point about TJD, Dan, I think he should be in the starting lineup. I don't think he should close. He still can't make free throws. He still can get picked on defense in a matchup-based hunting-type isolation scenario.
It's my guy.
I know he's your guy, and he's been really good. But I think we saw last night against a team like Dallas that has physical bigs, that has quick guards, he can get exposed a little bit. Does that mean he's a bad player? No, he had one bad game. But I don't know if there's enough on the bone for me to say, holy, these are the young players that we'll trust to automatically take the mantle if, for example, Klay Thompson or Andrew Wiggins is not on this roster.
Someone in the text line, The answer is draft Bronny. We're going to talk about Bronny entering the NBA draft.
He might be a second rounder, Dan.
All right. Yeah, right. Here we go. Back to the phone lines at 888-957-9570. Berserkly, the location. Doug is the caller. Hello, Doug.
Hey, guys. Good morning. Love the conversation. I don't think that it's as difficult as we're making it out to be. Klay wants to be a lifetime Warrior. He has to know that he's not worth $40 million. They'll offer him some dollar figure. He'll take it, maybe with a little negotiation. And if he's hard-nosed and he doesn't take it, then he will not retire as a Warrior. We don't need to look for younger guys. We need to get younger. We are younger. We just need to play the younger guys. If you look at the end of the season, the second stringers, the younger guys, have actually done pretty well. And times they've done better than the starters. The starters come back in and they blow it. So the younger guys are going to be better next year. The talk was in Boston, you couldn't have Tatum and Brown play together. The talk here is we can't have Wiggins and Kaminga play together. It takes a little while to work it out, but I do think that those guys can play together and be really, really solid. I think what we need is what we've needed for years, is a big man in the middle, a shot blocker, someone who can score nominally, who can clog up the middle. Everybody knows We've needed that. We played a brand of ball that, magically got us championships because those guys were so good. But the league has changed, as you guys said earlier, and so we need a big man. I think if we get a big man, trade Saric, I don't know what to do about Chris Paul. I honestly don't know what to do. He's exceeded my expectations, but you may have to move off him. But I think that a big man and tweaking and playing these young guys more, as you guys said earlier, we're likely to win more games this year than last year, and it's been tough. The only thing I push back against that I heard earlier was if we don't have injuries, if we don't have suspensions, you're going to have injuries, and there's nothing that shows me that Draymond isn't going to get suspended some more. So that's what I would do. I would get a big man. I'd tweak things a little bit, but I don't think wholesale change is necessary. I'm interested in your thoughts, and thanks for taking the call.
I'm with you. I think this team, and I think everybody knows, including Steve Kerr and management, that they got to get bigger. I think small ball's antiquated. I think it's had its time. The Warriors changed the way the game's played, but things are cyclical in this league, and the big is returned. Now, the big is returned, but it's not Patrick Ewing playing down on the post, and it's not David Robinson, and it's not the bigs of yesteryear and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but the bigs have returned as far as every single team that is relevant in the NBA has a big. A big plays a role. Now, their role is different because they're playing extended from the hoop now, but the Golden State Warriors and this idea of being small and just simply winning the way they did back in 2016 no longer is applicable, especially when that younger core is now pushing 40 years of age. So they definitely have to get bigger. Trace Jackson-Davis is a start, but I think that's just the beginning. I think they need to also bring in other bigs because you cannot continually go into every game knowing that the other team has bigger players and you have a matchup problem. That sort of goes without saying. Let's get to another caller really quick. It's Bill in Danville is hanging on the line. 888-957-9570. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, guys. Regular listener, first-time caller. Wanted to weigh in on this conversation. I think that we stick with Wiggins for the playoffs. Seems he's got his head back on and playing well. And I would ride it because we know what he's capable of doing. And then this summer, look to get something for him. Stick with Kaminga. Maybe Wiggins wants to go home, right? And, the Knicks did a deal with the Raptors. R.J. Barrett is up there playing. Perhaps Wiggins wants to get back there or get him close to, like, Philadelphia. Maybe we can get something in return.
Do we get Scotty Barnes?
Hell no.
I just, I don't know their roster. They, aren't doing so well this year. But perhaps, Wiggins is still in his prime at 28, 29. Probably got some good years left in him, and he's not terribly expensive relative to some of these other contracts that are around.
Ev, what do you think?
I think the Raptors are an interesting case study because of the deadline. Like, something I also got into last night on postgame was how, for example, the Mavericks approached the trade deadline. Like, the two players that hurt you outside of Kyrie last night were P.J. Washington, who they traded for in Charlotte, and in fact, they moved off of a guy they gave a long-term contract to in Grant Williams to acquire P.J. Washington, and the other guy was Daniel Gafford, who was in Washington and was a forgotten piece on a Wizards team that's terrible, and they got him for a pretty cheap price. They added at the deadline in the trenches, and they got bigger. And that helped them, for example, last night, and I think it's helped them defensively after the All-Star break. Toronto, that's how I would like to see the Warriors, if they do make a move this offseason, approach the summer. Because the Raptors didn't just give up Anunoby for draft capital. To the caller's point, they got players back. R.J. Barrett is, I don't know, maybe a project. Some people, like, if you ask around the league or you listen to media members talk about R.J. Barrett, half will tell you he's really good and half will tell you he's never going to be anything. Emmanuel Quickley is a good, solid guard, but is he a starting guard for a good team, or is he more of a sixth man? Like, those are project pieces that they acquired knowing they weren't going to be able to re-sign Anunoby. So if there's a way the Warriors can thread the needle from that standpoint and get a project, I don't know if it's RJ Barrett specifically, but a player like that, similar to how they brought in Wiggins and then immersed him into the system and he eventually flourished. That is how I think they should try and get better this offseason. Because as much as I'm with you, I think they could use a second star. Anyone could. I mean, hell, you saw last night the Mavericks win a game without their best player because they went out and traded for a star last offseason in Kyrie Irving, and then they gave him big money, and so far he has recouped on that and given them the requisite production. I don't think there's a guy like that out there for the Warriors. And if there is, it's going to cost major bucks. It's going to cost major draft capital, and that's something I don't really want to do.
By the way, P.J. Washington, 40 minutes last night, 32 points. He was the difference maker in that game.
Yeah.
Kyrie Irving was good, but they had no answer for P.J. Washington, who just simply went off. And he had the game winner as the Golden State Warriors falling by 2 to the Dallas Mavericks, 108-106. Do want to revisit the conversation about the clutch gene and Klay Thompson, but for right now, we want to get out to Dino, who's hanging out and joins the conversation. Dino, what's on your mind, man?
Hey, guys. Loving the conversation as I cross the bridge here. I think you guys are kind of nailing it, and some of the callers have too, which is if the premise is we want to get another, gear up for ring number 5 in Steph's glory years, and we're going to keep Draymond and Klay, right? Then the tightrope we're walking, and the management is walking, is that we've got to enable the young guys to blossom and to play and sustain us over the course of the season, and hopefully have one of them, maybe Kaminga, develop into that solid number 2 that Klay used to be, and at the same time keep the older guys fresh for the stretch run in the playoffs when they can make a difference given their experience, right? And so I kind of feel like we're going to have to run it back. I think that going into next season, what the coaching staff could really benefit and the team could benefit from is just having more defined and clear roles. I don't think that was the case this year. Certainly wasn't last. It's kind of like a roll of the dice, and given injuries and the suspension and everything, who can give us what? But, Klay isn't the two-way guy anymore, right? You know what you're going to get with Wiggins defensively, but not offensively, and then vice versa with Kaminga, right? And so we need them to step up. I think if we can have Wiggins take more of a backseat next season, and it doesn't mean he needs to come off the bench, but just in terms of maybe minutes to let Kaminga continue to grow defensively, I think that'll be super helpful. And then we're moving off of Chris Paul. We're going to move off of Saric. There's some overlap, unfortunately, with Moody, but we need some 3-and-D guys if Podensky's going to be the backup point guard, just to solidify at the margins. Given that we're heavy top loaded with Steph and Klay, and so I really think that's going to have to be the recipe. And the alternative is, who do you get for Wiggins? Who do you get for Kaminga, who's out there? OG Anunoby would have been like the guy, or Siakam. Yeah. There's nobody out there like that. So that's my thoughts. Just run it back and just have more defined roles. And I think if you do that, the youngsters can really get a sense of comfort and encouragement and confidence. And hopefully that'll sustain us to a better record next season.
That's interesting.
What do you think?
I think the sentiment we're feeling from the fan base, and again, if you want to chime in, 888-957-9570 is the number, also the number for the Comcast Business text line. The sentiment I feel like we're getting from the fans, Dan, is that because of the emergence and the provided stability of the young players that we're discussing, Kaminga, Podziemski, Trace Jackson-Davis, I know he didn't play well last night, and neither did Moses Moody, but those 4 guys, I think, have made fans feel more comfortable about not making wholesale changes this summer, bringing back some of the members of the aging core, in particular, Wiggins and Klay, and then riding out the rest of the season, assuming that the older players have diminished roles. Because if you can get an efficient Curry, Klay, Dre playing 25 to 30 minutes, or maybe a little more on some nights, then maybe you can get 70 games out of them if you decrease their overall workload. And if there's more reliance on younger players next season, well, then maybe you can be a 47, 48-win team, and next season in the West, that's good enough to be a 6 seed. I don't know if there's anything this summer, Dan, And this is kind of the vibe I'm getting. I don't know if there's enough this summer out there for you to justify completely reshaping this roster. And that's why I feel like in the last 2 months, it's gone from we got to have a star, we got to move and get a secondary option for Curry, who we know who he's going to be, to, well, maybe we do run this thing back and just see how it shakes out. Because again, they're going to be better this year than they were last year. The difference is, to your point, the West overall has gotten better. So do you measure yourself to the conference, or do you measure yourself based on previous iterations? I feel like the Warriors are looking at who they are, what kind of brand of basketball they're playing, and saying if we can do that more consistently with more help from younger players, well, then we might actually have some action next season.
Well, here's the issue. If you bring back this aging core, is that you're looking again, I believe, as a team that's going to be vying for the play-in. Maybe you're scratching for an 8 or a 7 seed. And the reason is simply what it is we're witnessing this year. While you can be good at times and you can play good basketball and be one of the best teams statistically, and a one-loss record can support that over, say, a month, maybe a month and a half, maybe a couple of weeks. But when you're an aging team and you're in your mid-30s and Steph Curry's going to be 37 years of age, you can't sustain that over the course of 82 games. There's no way. That is not sustainable for an older team to play at a winning clip, where this area and this team was accustomed to a 1, 2, or 3 seed. The last time they won a championship 2 years ago, they were the 3 seed. Those days are done. When you're this old, you can play well, but they're just at brief stints, meaning for a couple of weeks or maybe a month. But the sustainability becomes really problematic. People, let's not forget, this team was once 73-9. 73-9.
Wow. There's only been one team that's been 73-9.
I get that. But you were once a dominant team from wire to wire, that now, as you age, you have to settle for a team that's going to be vying for the play-in and or a 7-8 seed at best, simply because I don't believe that it's sustainable to do over 82 games when you're in your mid-30s. I'd love to be proven wrong. Walnut Creek, the location. We continue with the conversation. Dale wants to talk about Klay Thompson. What's up, Dale?
Yeah, I'm going to just specifically answer the question you're asking, Dan. Does Klay have the clutch gene? I'm not going to talk about should we sign him, should we not sign him, all that other stuff. Does Klay have the clutch gene? Game 6 Klay. Game 6 Klay. He has the clutch gene. It is really, really unfortunate as to what happened to him. He has not come back as the guy that he was before. He's frustrated. He's tired, but we love him. We hate when he misses the shots that he used to make. But if the question is, does Klay have the clutch gene? Please don't ever ask the question again. Thanks a lot, guys.
Dale telling me what to do. Dale, don't ever tell me what to do on this show. Thank you very much. That's a good point. But I am going to ask it again, and I'll tell you why.
Don't piss off Devone, Dale.
Hey, no, good job, Dale. Because you put me back on track is what you did, Dale. I do want to get into the clutch team.
Yeah.
But speaking of Game 6, do you want to revisit Game 6 of a year ago there, Ev, and give us numbers from last year?
I don't know if I want to. I mean, they weren't pretty. Actually, it was on this very station before the year, Joe Lacob even brought up how bad that game was, and I was really surprised that he called out Klay Thompson and said he had a terrible Game 6 against the Lakers in which he went like 3 for 17, and that's a Game 6 I hope we never revisit again. But to answer the question, is Klay clutch? Yes.
Just kicking it around. Certainly not saying he's not. I'm just curious, after missing that corner 3 last night, do you believe that towards the end of the game, if Steph is covered and he's got a double or a triple team, who are you comfortable with taking that last shot? Is it Klay Thompson? Do you just have that secure feeling with the ball in his hands? How do you feel about it? Is he clutch? Is he still a clutch basketball player? 888-957-9570. The conversation continues. Evan Giddings, Dan Devone, Warriors this week. Back after this.
It's Johnny Mosley with Toyota's Tahoe Report. The weather is looking a little funky. It's going to be challenging, but I like that. And hey, it's Saturday.
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
Evan Giddings and Dan Devone. I'm watching the XFL. Is this a real thing now? The XFL kicked off?
XFL or USFL? Or UFL?
Well, I think the XFL merged with the USFL, and it's now the XFL.
Like 17 federations. Is it the one the Rock's involved in?
Yeah, this is the Rock's teams. Or the Rock's, yeah, he's the owner, or he's the president.
I can best in ballers.
Oh, well, there you go. Was another opportunity for you to do some play-by-play at the network level, my
That's
All
true.
right. So,
make a call, Dano.
Yeah, so the Golden State Warriors losers last night to get back on track by 2 to that of the Dallas Mavericks, a costly win that could have gained some ground and some teams that were in front of them. And it's a game that came down to an opportunity. And by the way, forget about kissing your sister and trying to tie this thing up and go into overtime. No, win that damn game and walk off and get on the bus and go home. So they went for it, and they had a good look. And it was Klay Thompson, and it was a corner three, and he clanked it, and Golden State comes up a 2-point loser to the Dallas Mavericks. And I'm just sort of almost tongue-in-cheek saying, does he still have the clutch gene? And I'm talking about Klay Thompson. And I'm just curious as to sort of the listeners' thoughts as to whether or not you're comfortable with the ball in his hands in the closing moments when it went to the corner and Klay Thompson had it. Did that, you know how this goes. As a fan, you feel secure when the ball's in certain guys' hands. I could tell you a year ago that in the waning moments of a contest that's going back and forth and Jordan Poole had the basketball, that was a scary, scary proposition. There's some players, I mentioned Chris Paul before. Mm-hmm. There's some guys that just do not want to be in that situation. I'm not saying that that's Klay Thompson. But when you think about the timeout, just to go back and to put you into the Final Four mode, when the Fab Five played in that championship game against North Carolina and they lost, go look at it. Chris Webber, and this is the way he was in his NBA career, in the closing moments, he wanted nothing to do with that basketball. He pulled the rebound. Actually, he got such happy feet, he traveled before he called the timeout. That's a dude that's a guy who does not have the clutch gene. Now, as it relates to Klay Thompson, and the only reason I kick this around is because when you look at the body of work this year, I think it was against the Clippers. Remember, he fouled late in the game in the closing seconds, and it was Steve Kerr who called the timeout and said, let's not foul here, right?
That's right.
And he committed that foul. You do things like that because you get a little jittery towards the end of the game. The last time they played the Dallas Mavericks was out here at Chase. Dallas was mounting a comeback. Again, in the closing, waning seconds of that game, he got away with another walk. I don't know if you saw that. They gave the ball in the inbound, and he ran with the basketball. So there's some guys in those closing moments, you're like, are you okay, brother? And so I'm just curious whether that's applicable to that of Klay Thompson. Does he got a little Chris Webber in him? Probably not. He's Game 6 Klay. I get it, but we're throwing it out there nevertheless. Mountain View is the location. And it's, what is this, Jan, all right. Oh, where are my glasses? Jan, are you, did you go to St. Francis?
Left your contacts at home.
No, I did not.
Okay, that's all I can associate with Mountain View. The Lancers. I went to SI, so the hell with St. Francis. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm concerned about Kaminga and thinking about, he's up for an extension, and I'm sure they want to retain him, but I'm thinking, I wonder if the training staff can do something to maybe help him change his style of play. Maybe he jumps up too high, or maybe it's because Kerr didn't play him last year as much as he should have. And, the time that he's played, from the, in the starting role has affected his knee with that tendonitis. And, going forward, as he gets a little older, he may end up with a meniscus or something like Embiid did if he doesn't, if they don't, watch him and maybe help him, try to, change his style of play. In the 49ers, how Debo plays, and he gets hurt, quite a bit because he's too aggressive and so on. And I'm just concerned that he might, he's a great player. I love him, but, I'm concerned about his health.
That's a good observation, Jan. He does play with a reckless abandon. what I find peculiar is that I always felt because he was so young, he was impenetrable. This is a guy who never got hurt. And so this sort of comes out of left field and comes out of nowhere when you're talking about, the knee injuries, because he was a guy that he just rolls out of bed. A lot of times as you get older, you're getting massages right after the game, the minute you wake up, before a game. But he looked like one of those young dudes who was just go, 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 high energy. But to your point, as we kicked off the show, that you seem to, at least you're implying that there might be something there when it comes to the injuries?
Well, I just think it's interesting or complicated that Kerr told us he was going to be back on Thursday. And not only was he not back on Thursday, but he wasn't back on Friday. And the tail end of the back-to-back is probably when you needed him most. And then there was the report yesterday that it wasn't like he worked out before the game, and then it sounded like post-game that Kerr talked to JK, and JK said, I'm not good to go. So it wasn't a medical thing, but we could be reading too much into it. I don't know. To me, why he's been out, or why the tendonitis, which is a scary term for a lot of people, I think you just associate it with like a degenerative type of thing at age 21. I think it just has to do with Dan. He's never played this much basketball before in his life. Like he's been relatively healthy. He'd only missed one game before this stretch of 5 in a row, and he's playing 30 minutes a night. He's played like 600 more minutes this season than he did last year. And even when he was in the G League, you're only playing 10 to 20 games in that season overall, at least for the Ignite. So I just feel like Kaminga is at the point where he's finally gotten to a full 6-month workload of a basketball season, and that's a lot on anyone if you're doing it for the first time.
So Jonathan Kaminga, will see, again, a game-time decision as to whether he'll be in uniform and good to go against the Utah Jazz. He's been sort of overlooked and forgotten about because the team has been playing so well. In fact, I want to say their first loss since his absence was last night at the hands of the Dallas Mavericks. They had turned things around. I don't think it's coincidental with Trayce Jackson-Davis coming into the lineup, as we have underlined and illustrated how it has freed up one Draymond Green, who is much better playing center field and much more effectively defensively when he knows he has somebody who has his back and is rim protecting. Whether you go back to the days of Andrew Bogut and company, he's just a much more effective defensive player, and we've seen that. And that is because of inserting one Jonathan Kaminga Trayce Jackson-Davis into the starting lineup. So it'll be interesting to see, A, whether he's healthy and good to go against the Utah Jazz. And I think if he's not, then to your point, Ed, there might be some meat on that bone, that there's something more to it than he was first diagnosed as far as the injury. And B, if he does come back, well, where does he play? Is he coming off the bench? All those questions to be answered coming up tomorrow. All right, back out to the phone lines, 888-957-9570. Let's go surfing in Pacifica. Junior joins us. What's up, Junior?
Hey, good. With Kaminga, I see good news in the medium term, but a question going forward. So when a young player starts playing more, as so many of us have been urging Steve Kerr to do with Kaminga, that's finally happened. This is pretty typical. I remember there was this kid named Steph Curry who couldn't get over his ankle problems for years.
Good stick.
So it'll be okay, even if we don't like, he's longer than we'd like this. I think over a couple of seasons, with this credible training staff, it'll be worked out. The question, for the first time, I'm willing to acknowledge that it might be a good idea to trade Kaminga for everyone's interest, not because he's not good enough, but because if he doesn't turn out to play well with Draymond and TJD as starters in a more defensive-minded philosophy, it's just that he might have a better next phase of his career and be more of a contribution on a different team that fits more with playing him a lot as he recovers, and gets the reps in that he didn't get in the college he didn't go to and the high schools he bounced around between. I would love to see him stay with the Warriors. I think it would be good for us and for them to kind of finish raising him up into a star player. But I can see where at the end of the season it might make a little sense for the next couple of years to bring in a proven player and put him someplace where he can truly thrive. So that's my thoughts for Kaminga today.
Good job, Junior. I think it's been proven that he can play with Andrew Wiggins, but it gets back to your point, Ev. If one of them has to go, Andrew Wiggins or Jonathan Kaminga, who's out the door?
Well, for this season, like he was talking about, the reason why you'd move Kaminga is because they can't play together. I would push back on that. Like, I think that they have a better starting five with TJD at the 5 because it's more to me about Draymond than it is about JK versus Wiggs. But they're not mutually exclusive. Like, just because Kaminga comes off the bench or hypothetically comes off the bench when he returns doesn't mean that they don't need him. Like, the starting 5 with TJD at center is their best defensive unit in the sample size that we've gotten so far. But I think their best closing lineup is still Curry, Clay, Wiggins, Kaminga, and Draymond because they're the most versatile lineup they have to offer. I don't think TJD is at a point where he can close games. And where have we seen the Warriors be historically great? Not with these specific 5 players, but with the equation of Draymond starts at the 4 alongside Zaza or JaVale or Bogut or Cousins or whoever, and by the end of the game, those guys are off the floor because you want to maximize the amount of wings you can play with. Kaminga is not a finished product, but he is still a valuable wing for them. So just because they've gone on this run without him doesn't mean that all of a sudden I view Kaminga as expendable. It doesn't mean that I view him as someone they have to trade this summer because they're better without him. No, I still think that they are a very good 5-man unit with the one that I just laid out. And I feel like if they're going to make noise, if they're going to win 2 play-in games and get to the playoffs, I think their closing 5 at full strength still involves Jonathan Kaminga.
Oh, he's a foundational piece of this team as far as I'm concerned going forward. With his youth, the potential. The only reason you would move him is if there's a serious upgrade or you're getting serious value in return for Jonathan Kaminga, where it just makes sense that he was a piece that we couldn't get this guy unless we let Jonathan Kaminga go. The only concern I have with Jonathan Kaminga is if indeed he goes back to the bench, which is a strong possibility, as soon as tomorrow against Utah, we'll wait and see. It's just the buy-in with this guy. We just know that mentally he can be really fragile. And this is not the time of the year where you can afford to have a young man just go back into that doghouse. That's, to me, a real concern. It means a lot to a young player to be a starter. Now, he may get more minutes coming off the bench, but I just think from what we've seen, the brief sample size this year, that Jonathan Kaminga is going to interpret this as a demotion, especially to your point that usually when you see a Klay Thompson or an Andrew Wiggins relegated to the bench, it's because of poor play. Well, that hasn't been the case with Jonathan Kaminga. And once again, it's going to get back to what it is that he said early on in the season, like, why am I not getting more playing time? Because I'm playing so well. And here he is again in his head, facing a similar scenario. Back out to the phone lines at 888-957-9570. The city is the location, Bayview. And let me hear from Jerry. Jerry, what's up, buddy?
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call. With Jonathan Kaminga and all the trade talk, people are saying they're going to keep him next year. They're going to sign him so that they can trade him next year. They're going to need that salary slot. But what people aren't really talking about, the new league rules went in this year. So the Warriors have to be under the luxury tax 2 of the next 4 years after this, or the penalties are incredible. So next year they can squeeze in Klay Thompson, they can have Kaminga and kind of run it back, but there's not going to be a whole lot of room for additions. And Joe Lacob has already said he wants to get below the luxury tax this year. And I just think people don't quite understand the economics. Thanks, guys.
Good call, Jerry. They're backing up, so let's knock some of these out. Filmo Mike is hanging out in San Francisco. Filmo, what's on your mind?
Oh, man. Stop hating on Chris Webber. He was way more clutch than you think. Because also, no, to be real, Curry makes those mistakes all the freaking time in the clutch time. So it's like, I don't want to hear nothing about Chris. Call it Curry. He don't have the Chris Webber. Call it the Curry what Chris Webber got. Because Curry, Dre, Clay, they all make Chris Webber-sized mistakes in the clutch. We're not more so clutch. We're like clutch with a minute left. We're not like Michael Jordan, Reggie Miller, Damian Lillard clutch, in my opinion. We make big shots, but I don't think that we have players that just give me the ball. I'm finna score. Wooty. That's just me. Maybe Curry is our closest one. Anyway, I don't want to drag on that. Kaminga, to me, a lot of the Kaminga factor is a trip because a lot of fans my age and probably older remember the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000 Warriors. They was basically like the G League for the NBA. The Warriors would draft a player, right? And then they'll get kind of good and kind of, seasoned a little bit. And then the Warriors think they have a trade and to trade them, a la Mitch Richmond, a la a lot of players. So, like, a lot of my fan base and older, I think we don't want to trade like just assets. You know what I'm saying? That's just us. Dan, you can maybe talk to that. But one player that I just wanted to bring up was that reminds me of Kaminga as far as his growth was two players. Anton Jamison, because he started off kind of rocky with the Warriors, and then he gradually got better. But another player is Gilbert Arenas. If y'all remember, Gilbert Arenas made his stride the second half of the season, not his second year. His second year, he was raw, and that's why he left, because at that time they didn't have a rule in which your second round player could stay on the team, and y'all couldn't sign him again. My point is, don't trade Kaminga. Allow him to develop like they did Jamison and Gilbert Arenas.
An Agent Zero reference. Your thoughts, Ev?
Well, Arenas was really freaking good, is what he was as a scorer. But that was, there's a rule because of Gilbert Arenas now, right? Like, you can't just offer the second round whatever you want. For example, that's why one of the reasons I think the Warriors gave TJD a guaranteed contract. Like, he's guaranteed for 4 years. You lock him in at a certain price, and now you don't have to worry about him walking after his second season or third season like Gilbert Arenas did. Yeah, like, is Jonathan Kaminga going to be a future number one on a championship team? I don't see that right now. But to a caller's point earlier, we also didn't foresee the future of a lot of these players. And without all three of the big three, the Warriors aren't a title team anyways. So is Jonathan Kaminga by himself going to will the Warriors back into contention beyond Curry? I think that's a lot to ask of any player. But could he be a piece to a championship team? That I'm willing to pay to find out. And that's what they're going to have to make the decision this summer. They're going to have to decide, do they want to ante up and pay him probably Jordan Poole or more money just to see what he can become through his mid-20s? I would lock in that choice.
Yeah, I would think that's sort of a no-brainer. I would, however, dangle this, that if you are thinking of upgrading this basketball team and not running it back, so to speak, and you want to bring back a star basketball player, well, you're one commodity, and we can talk about, packaging Wiggins and throwing in Chris Paul, and you can have a Kevon Looney and all these players. It doesn't really going to bring back crap at the end of the day. The one movable piece, the one guy, the one asset you have where people will say, okay, I'm listening, is going to be Jonathan Kaminga. So while I agree with you that it should be a no-brainer, you give him that extension, that he is sort of this foundational piece of your future going forward as far as the younger players are concerned. But I also think you have to keep in the back of your mind that if the Warriors do indeed want to find that complementary piece or that person that is, along with Steph Curry, going to give you, and you can rely upon, big numbers every night, then Jonathan Kaminga, much like that of the trade deadline, his name is going to resurface.
I can't do it. Like, I just can't. Unless you're telling me there's something else that's coming in that is certifiably going to move the Warriors into a top...
Karl Anthony Towns.
Well, you're also going to have to give up a lot more than Jonathan Kaminga to get him. So, for example, like there's... let's take Donovan Mitchell, right? Donovan Mitchell, I think, is a really good player. And he's a number one on a team that's top 4 seed in the East. Do you know what it cost the Cleveland Cavaliers to get Donovan Mitchell? It cost Lauri Markkanen, who is now a borderline all-star player. couple of throw-in players. I think Abaji was in there, former first-round pick. But it costs capital, Dan. It costs 4 unprotected first-round picks and 2 first-round pick swaps. The Cleveland Cavaliers essentially mortgaged the next 6 seasons, or I guess 4, because they got them last year. But they essentially mortgaged over a half decade of first-round capital to acquire a guy who might not even be able to get them to a 3 seed. So that's why I'm saying there are stars out there that might be attainable, but at what cost? Including Kaminga, the Warriors are already going to have to include Kaminga in any big boy deal that they want to move on. But they're also going to have to include a lot of first-round picks. And the last place that I want to see Golden State is at the tail end of Curry's career, no matter who's around him. If Draymond could be gone, Klay could be gone, everyone could be gone, but Curry's still here. The last thing that I want to see is Curry at the tail end, at the twilight, at the white dwarf stage of his career, with the Warriors looking up and saying, damn, we got no first-round picks for the next 3 seasons. That's the last thing that I want, because a big reason that the Warriors had to try and push all their chips and go in on this current roster, Dan, is because they had no alternative. You don't have a first-round pick this year. I think there may have been a choice when they were 5 games below 500, and it looked like Draymond was going to be suspended, and it looked like guys were getting hurt and dropping like flies. There might have been some conversation if you had an unprotected lottery pick to say, well, maybe we do shut it down this year. Maybe we do try and get one of these big boys in the draft. We already hit on Podziemski and TJD. We trust our front office. They might have gone in that direction if there was a draft pick to be made. They don't have a chance to make that choice. So the last thing I can do is give up on future assets for a team that already has a pretty murky immediate future.
Yeah, I'm not big on draft picks. And as far as the Cleveland Cavaliers, I bet you the room would be divided if you were to talk to a Cavalier fan and say, would you pull that trade? Would you pull the trigger on that trade if you could do it all over again? I think you have to keep in mind where the Cavaliers were at prior to the trade. And although being a 3 seed, and I think the injuries certainly are not something that they were able to foresee, and Donovan Mitchell hasn't been available. But that team, along with Evan Mobley, and it doesn't really work with him and Darius Garland, but they're a relevant basketball team, and that's really all you're asking for. I think at the end of the day, is
but are we
get
though?
Back and
I think a lot of people want to see him in championship contention. It's not just being relevant. That's not good enough for a lot of people.
All right, Hilltop is in Fairfield. He's next on 95.7 The Game. What's up, Hilltop?
Hey, fellas. First of all, what are we talking about here, man? The Warriors are a 10th seed, number 1. So we're talking about starting Wiggins and letting Kaminga come off the bench. That's ridiculous, because if you put him on the bench, you lose him. He's already told Kerr that he didn't trust his lineup. So Kerr put him in the starting lineup, and he played well the whole time. You cannot pull him out now because he's injured and put him back to the bench. You lose him. And he's not going to play well if you pull him off the bench. Secondly, with Wiggins and Draymond. A couple weeks ago, Draymond, Kerr said Draymond was unforgivable, what he did. Now we're harping him up. I'm going to tell you what's should happen at the end of this year. We all know, you guys may think that they're a championship team. We all know they're not. They're a 500 team. They're going to get to the playoffs, play-in game. They'll probably get bounced before they even get to the 7-round series. And then they're going to have to blow it up next year. So you're going to have somebody to build with Kerr. With Curry. So you got Kaminga, you got Davis, and you got Podziemski, and you got Klay. Everybody else should be on the table. They should blow it up after this year, because otherwise you can't run this team back next year with Wiggins and Steph and Klay. They already showed they're a 500 team. You can't, and the only teams they really beat, to be honest with you, are teams that were, we at the end of the year. Where teams are, they already thinking about Cabo. So again, you got to blow it up after this year, man. You got to hang on to Kaminga, man. You can't lose it. So when he comes back healthy, you got to play him, win, lose, or draw.
A lot of questions.
I mean, I think you can play him. That doesn't mean he has to start, though. And as much as, I would be, I guess, a little worried about the fragility of a 21-year-old, I do think it's a little disingenuous to assume that JK couldn't be a professional and go to the bench. Like, I think I think that's impressing a little bit of a juvenile mindset on him just because he's young. And I also don't think that the unprofessionalism is something that he's publicly displayed. Like, for example, he brought up the comment about losing faith in his coach. That was from his camp. Kaminga never said that. So I do think it's disingenuous to attribute that particular sentiment to him as a person instead of to people around him.
Well, I guess the word that I threw out earlier, or the phrase, is buy-in. And sometimes his body language looked as though he checked out. You need that buy-in. And whatever that is, whether that's Steve Kerr sitting him down and explaining the move or starting him, but you need him to be a guy that's attentive. You can't have him check out at this juncture of the season. All right, we'll continue the conversation. You want to talk about Jonathan Kaminga. Where do you think the Golden State Warriors will end up in the play-in? Are they going to be the 9? Are they going to be the 10? Can they jump to the 8? And how will things end up for the Golden State Warriors in the 2024 campaign when you talk about the postseason? Evan Giddings and Dan Devone, we've hit 11 o'clock. One more hour to go on Warriors This Week. Back after this.
Are you curious about who offers the best deals on top-rated Samsung, LG, and Sony TVs? The answer is surprising. It's not online, and it's not the where.
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
Welcome back to 95.7 The Game alongside Evan Giddings. It is Dan Devone. We have hit the final hour talking about the Golden State Warriors coming up a bucket short to that of the Dallas Mavericks in a game that they really could have used as the teams in front of them stubbed their toe. Sacramento dealing with injuries to some key players. Herter and Monk are out, so they seem to be a little bit susceptible. Also having to deal with a difficult road swing out east. So Golden State, again, unable to take advantage of a recent loss by that of Sacramento, a rash of losses. And also the Pelicans were losers as well. Just 5 games to go. In front of them, of course, are the Los Angeles Lakers. 2 games in front of the Golden State Warriors for that 9 seed. Those 2 teams to square off coming up on Tuesday in a very, very big contest as Golden State eyeing that 9 seed. We've been going back and forth and talking about, is there a time during this season that you just relegate yourself, or is there going to be a point where Steve Kerr and company are just resigned to that 10 seed and you rest the starters? Because rest becomes really key in all of this. We talked about more than any other team in the NBA, that includes the Eastern Conference, that the Golden State Warriors needed to get to that 6 seed. Because as a team that is in their mid-30s, you need those 6 days off. That's not going to happen despite the wishful thinking of one Brandon Pajemski. But Golden State at this juncture, could you foresee a scenario where you would sit some of the starters in a game so that you can save legs going into this play-in series?
I do, but I think it all depends on what happens on Tuesday against the Lakers. And that's assuming you beat the Jazz, which they should, because Utah's an absolute abomination. I don't know if you've seen, Dan, they've lost 11 in a row. But to me, the path that maybe became a little more viable, and I think is best case scenario at this point, because I'm just under the assumption the Warriors are playing in the 9-10 game. But I think to me that the best case scenario for them is actually the Lakers jump the Kings. The Lakers beat the Pelicans, and that way your play-in path would be through Sacramento and New Orleans, 2 teams that are, I think, good matchups for the Warriors. I don't think the Lakers are a good matchup. And if they had to go to Los Angeles, I wouldn't feel good about it, especially if it's the first or even if it's the second elimination game. But the best case scenario for me would be to go through Sacramento and New Orleans, who are both right now reeling. Meanwhile, the Warriors, even though they lost last night and was a golden opportunity for them to jump into a potential 7-8 fashion, they are playing good basketball. And it looks like they're going to get fully healthy before the playoffs. So yeah, I'm hoping that the Kings and the Pelicans continue to dive. And even if the Warriors don't beat the Lakers on Tuesday, that the Lakers can catch the 7 and I don't know if it's host that first game, but just win so that the Warriors don't have to see them.
And once you get into the playing game, if you're just to go big picture, isn't their destiny already sort of been predetermined? Because even if you were able to somehow win on the road, and then you're going to, and it's a pretty quick turnaround, if you're going in as the 10 seed, that you're going to take on either Minnesota or the Denver Nuggets. As it currently sits, Minnesota and the Nuggets both tied for the number 1 seed out in the Western Conference. I think you can prolong things if you see Minnesota, because there's much more of a fighter's chance that you can get past Minnesota in a 7-game series. I do not see having to play 2 games on the road, winning those 2 games, and then turning around in quick fashion and having to play the Denver Nuggets and having any shot of taking on what I think is the best team in basketball. So the Warriors sort of, as we again sort of live in the moment of how they're going to get into the play-in tournament, who it is that they're going to play, and potentially what their seeding might be and how they can improve, whether it's the 9 or the 8 or the 7. Their fate was really sealed when you think about this team and the games that, for lack of a better term, they gave away early on in the campaign. How much of that do you think, if Steve Kerr was to look in the mirror and have these conversations with himself, say that was sort of on me? And I don't know if he's responsible at all, but just for the sake of conversation, does he factor into that, in that conversation, into the equation, that he was slow to sort of recognize Trace Jackson Davis or Pajemski, or that now infamous game where he pulled Moses Moody, who was just riding a hot streak, and he goes with Klay Thompson? I mean, all that sort of morphing in the identity of this basketball team that they couldn't locate early on in the season. Do we put the crosshairs on Steve Kerr at all?
I mean, if the Warriors are a 10 seed, I think you got to look up and down the roster. And maybe we differ here, Dan. Like, Kerr's not, he's complicit and deserves criticism if and when they are bounced eventually, because I don't think they're going to win a championship this season. But I guess, I don't know, like, the issue with this team from beginning to end to me is that they've got too many playable players, but not enough really good players. Like, beyond Curry, the number 2 has fluctuated seemingly like every game. The 2 through 7 up until recently has been up in the air. And honestly, the fact that we're talking about Kaminga not rejoining the starting lineup as a potential, aid for the Warriors means the hierarchy is going to be reshuffled again. Like, the Warriors have had almost 20 starting lineups this year in an 82-game season is pretty ridiculous. So as much as I think Kerr has not been perfect this season, I could also make the argument easily that this has been the most difficult season to coach the Warriors because you haven't had any clear choices, and the clear choices are not because you don't know how to use your guys, but because you don't know what you're going to get. The 2 wild cards that we've been discussing, the 2 wings, Kaminga and Wiggins. One, at his best, Wiggins is probably better than Kaminga. You just don't know when you're going to get it. Kaminga has been more stable than Wiggins, but at 21 years old, do you really know how he's going to be able to help you in a postseason series? No, because he didn't play last year. So I think Kerr definitely deserves some blame, but I also can't necessarily fault him for not knowing who to use on a certain night. Like last night, let's take last night for example. Trayce Jackson-Davis has been really good in the starting lineup, and he's a big reason why they won 6 games in a row. He wasn't very good last night. Like, I don't know if I can put that on Kerr. Like, TJD didn't play well. Moses Moody is naturally the guy you start when one of the 2, or both in last night's case, Wiggins and Kaminga are out. And he's been Mr. Stay Ready, and he'd been pretty good. He shot the ball well against Houston also. He shot the ball well on Tuesday against Dallas. I think he was the reason why they won that game. He wasn't very good last night. Like, he was getting picked apart on defense. So if you don't know what you're going to get from your players, I think it's hard to be a coach that's all of a sudden playing the wrong hand, if you know what I mean.
No, I do. And I'm not putting this on Steve Kerr. But I do think that if you...
Yeah, even Steph Curry, to the 510's point. Steph has been up and down this year. In fact, Steph is not been, his same self as he was pre-All-Star break. He has been post-All-Star break. So there's the decision of when you got to use him and when you want to pull him. I thought he made the wrong choice in Minnesota last weekend, not giving Curry an extra minute or 2 when the game was slipping. Last night, he went to him with 10 minutes and 45 seconds left because they needed that game. Maybe that's the reason why Curry missed the 3 with 30 seconds. I don't know. Like, I just feel like it's hard for me to look solely at Steve Kerr as the reason why this team hasn't reached its potential.
Oh, no, and that's not what I'm implying. I guess the reason why I bring up the coach this season and Steve Kerr is because at the beginning of the year, there was this sort of this lack of identity and the slow to sort of embrace the younger players. I'm just saying if that light had gone on a little bit sooner, where Podziemski, Trayce Jackson-Davis, and even Jonathan Kaminga were having more of an impactful role with this basketball team early on in the season, if Steve Kerr had that come to Jesus moment a lot sooner than he did, is this team a lot further along? Is this team, vying for potentially the, that 6th seed? I'm just curious, because clearly there was a turning point, or did that all just sort of organically have to happen, where Podziemski gets an opportunity to play that night against Minnesota because Klay was out. That was the game Klay Thompson gets kicked out of the game, Draymond gets kicked out of the game, and Steph Curry wasn't playing in the game, and therefore he looks down the bench and it's like somebody's got to play the guard position. Podziemski, you're in. Podziemski has the big game, and suddenly they recognize, oh my goodness, this guy's a player. Same with Trayce Jackson-Davis to a certain degree. Maybe all that just sort of organically had to happen. My question, I guess, is, in retrospect, could Steve Kerr had expedited a lot of that, going to the youngsters sooner than he did? And if he did, would this team be in a different position as it relates to the postseason?
Perhaps. I mean, and I think he'd tell you, they probably should have won a few games that they lost, and they probably also have won a few games that they shouldn't win. The thing about the young players is it's a different version of the same with the older guys. The older guys, you know who they are, but you just don't know if their legs are going to be there on a given night. The younger players are inexperienced, so you don't know what kind of productivity you're going to get from them. Like I think Podziemski is a very good piece, and he's been, for a 19th overall pick, he's been a godsend for them this year. They wouldn't be in this position without him.
17th.
We also
17th.
Oh, 17th, sorry. But we also found out that he probably shouldn't be starting. Like, he was in the starting lineup, and then he hit a rookie wall, and now he's back to the bench. So if Kerr had, to your point, expedited the process of starting Podziemski, we might have found out earlier that he actually shouldn't be a starter. You know what I'm saying? Like, Trace Jackson-Davis has come along, but I think that's been more about Kevon Looney not being effective at all as a backup five. And Trace Jackson-Davis now needing to start because Draymond had worn down playing all those minutes at center. If Draymond was 28 years old, maybe in fact the best route would be to play Draymond solely at the five because he could handle that workload. So leaning all the way into the youth, I don't know has ever been the answer for this team. But to your point, I guess he could have integrated them a little quicker. I just don't know how that would have looked because at the end of the day, where they are right now is playing with 4 veteran guys in their starting lineup, and they've only gotten all the way back around in a kind of circle or roundabout way. They've gotten back to that point because they went to young guys and found out they couldn't use them as much as maybe they wanted to, and these older players have now needed some time to kind of find their footing, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I think you have to keep in mind that in the first 2 months of the season, these guys didn't play at all. And I guess my only point, and again, I'm not going after Steve Kerr. That'd be stupid. He's a legendary coach, and I'm a big Steve Kerr fan, but he was the only guy that was privy to what it is that these guys could do. And what I mean by that is that in practice, he was the only guy that could see, wow, this Podziemski's a little different. And Trace Jackson-Davis is giving me some height that I'm obviously lacking on a basketball team. And not only that he's got some athleticism, he's got good hands and a pick and roll. This could work. I would have more credit for Steve Kerr, or I would love to see Steve Kerr if he out of nowhere was playing Podziemski, a guy who was, a 17th round pick out of Santa Clara that nobody had ever heard for, or is playing this second rounder, Trace Jackson-Davis, early on in the season. And you're like, well, what the hell are you doing? Who are these guys? Simply because he could care less, only because he was privy and was able to see that these guys, that this could translate to the NBA game, instead of sort of his hand being forced in a lot of ways, where the reason why Podziemski played, again, is because he had to. He was out of players in that game against Minnesota and sort of slow to warming to Trace Jackson-Davis. These guys were not playing in the beginning part of the campaign, and Steve Kerr knew what it is that he could do. But I think that there was that reliance or that comfortable factor, however you want to phrase it, with sort of the aging members of this basketball team. And I guess the only point I'm trying to make is that had he again gone to Podziemski simply because he was the one that he knew what Podziemski could do because he had seen him in the summer, seen him in practice, and I'm going to roll the dice that this is going to translate to the NBA game, and when we got bullets flying for real, that this guy is going to pay off and he's going to pay dividends. But instead, it was much more of a process before, he was able to recognize that these guys could play at this level. And by that time, you're a couple of months into the season, you've lost a lot of games that potentially you could have won, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the issue is the logjam on the roster. Like, for every young guy, there's an older guy who's either been a part of the championship team or has some sort of resume that kind of prevents the younger player from usurping him, at least at the start of the year. I think also something, too, Dan, that kind of plays into this is, again, just on a given night, they've been so up and down, and they were midway through the year that, I didn't know what the right decision was. I don't know if the right decision was to start Podziemski or bench Wiggins or bench Clay or move this guy, move that guy. The roster or the lineups have just looked so different from game 1 to 82 that it's really hard for me to look back and say that was definitively the wrong choice. I think Kerr was forced into playing a lot of the younger players, but that's just because of the age. Like if you could pencil in Curry and Wiggins and Draymond and Clay for 82 games, then we might be in the same place as we were game one. I don't know if they'd be worse off or not. But the other part of it too is, and you mentioned like the practice or getting the first look at some of these guys. I think that there's maybe a misunderstanding by a lot of people about just how much practice actually occurs.
That's true.
At the beginning and throughout this season. Like, they don't practice very often. Especially, like, right now, they've played, again, by the end of the season, they'll play 17 games in 30 days.
That's a good point.
That means every day that they're off, they're not running them through practice. Like, they might be getting treatment. Guys might be icing their legs, or they might be getting in cryo chambers. They're using those off days for recovery. They're not using them for strategy and game planning as much as we believe. And at the beginning of the year, yes, there is a training camp, but they played like 3 or 4 preseason games. So how much can you really take away from that? I think that's part of it as well. It's not like you go off to, it's not like football where you got 2 months of, you got rookie mini camps, and then you got a voluntary invite, and then you got your rookies coming in, you got your vets that come for a month and get ready for the season. Then you got 4 weeks of preseason. Like, there's not a significant buildup before the year starts for you to evaluate wholly what you have. I think Kerr has been forced to trust his younger players, but I don't know if he even knew that these guys were ready to play until he was forced to throw them into the game.
It's interesting you bring up the football analogy because Andy Reid, when he had Patrick Mahomes replace Alex Smith, it was a foregone conclusion. In fact, the writing was on the wall that Alex Smith was going to get dealt, and they went to the playoffs that year. They weren't as good of a football team, but why? Why was this an inevitability when Patrick Mahomes had never played? This is his rookie year. He was sitting behind Alex Smith the entire season. Well, the reason being is because Andy Reid had seen what this dude could do in practice. He's like, there's no way in hell Alex Smith can compete with this guy. We're going Patrick Mahomes the next year, even though we went to the playoffs and even though Patrick Mahomes has never played a snap in the NFL. It was all predicated on practice and what he was doing behind the curtain, I guess, to a certain degree. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, too, it's, like you don't get a spring training like in baseball. You don't get, July workouts in August like football. And also, to be fair, too, it's, to, I guess, extrapolate the football analogy, it would be like you looking at your 50th man on your roster and saying, well, actually, I think this guy should be better than our fourth or sixth best player. Like, I think it's also just really hard to make that evaluation immediately unless the dude jumps off the screen. And while TJD has had flashes even before he started to play well now, you're kind of basing what you think about him off of the larger sample size, which is what he did in college. And that may not be what you immediately want to thrust into your rotation or your lineup. I just feel like because the team has been all over the place this year, it's been a good thing that they've had these players. And so I'm glad that they drafted them. And that's kind of what they're there for. Like, at the end of the day in the NBA, rookies are not going to be the reason why you are a great basketball team. The Denver Nuggets last year had Christian Brown in their rotation, but he was their 7th or 8th man. Like, he's not expected to just jump from a national championship winning Kansas group into the starting lineup of a team that's going to try and run the table.
When you look at the Golden State Warriors and just using their box last night as an example, the question then becomes, I've always maintained you need that second scorer that you can rely on. You cannot count upon Steph Curry to carry this load throughout 82 games. He's going to hit walls, especially when he gets to 37 years of age. But there are some now that would subscribe because they've been able to win 6 games in a row, that having it sort of dispersed in the strength in numbers sort of, mantra resurfaces. You look at the scoring line last night, and it was another game that was well played. But again, everybody's contributing, including Moses Moody had 9, Trace Jackson Davis an off night had 8. You get Klay Thompson with 16, 14 for Bajemski, 14 for Gary Payton Jr. I mean, we've seen throughout this run, Ev, that Steph's been good.
Yeah.
He hasn't been great. It hasn't been, these 40, 50-point blowouts or big numbers by that as Steph Curry, but it's been it's been everybody contributing. It's been Andrew Wiggins getting 20, Podziemski double digits, Trace Jackson-Davis had a career-high 20 the other night. Is there buy-in to that? Is that sort of your point, that one of the reasons, or at least one of the arguments to bring it back or run it back next year, is because of what we're witnessing, that it can be Steph and then it can be a host of other players?
I don't think they're going to jump all of a sudden to a 4 seed by acquiring talent. I just don't know that that's realistic. But where the Warriors have always been able to make up for either a lack of talent or athleticism has been with their chemistry. Like, this is a team that looks far more connected to me than last season's team. That's why I think that they're better. Like, they just play better together. So that, to me, is the path for them, and that would be the reason why you would run it back. I do want to reveal on the other side why you should not, because there is a pretty damning statistic in terms of placement in reference to your point earlier, Dan, about the rest of the Western Conference and how the Warriors should not be looking at just themselves. They do need, and finally are in a place where they can't just measure themselves against the Warriors. They do need to measure themselves against the West, because the West is not going anywhere. And next season, if they're in the same place, and I have a stat on the other side that I do want to reveal, if they're in that same place, they are going to be in trouble. So while we've tossed around a lot about do you run it back and do you not, I think there is something that would indicate to me that you do need to make changes if you can this upcoming summer.
Let me throw this at you. Maybe this could be our tease going to the break. As silly as this may sound, just let it marinate, all right? Would you rather be the Golden State Warriors this offseason, or would you rather be the San Antonio Spurs?
888-957-9570.
Well, think about it. San Antonio, obviously, you
need about 4.5 minutes, Dan, to think that one through.
888-957-9570. You want to be the Spurs this offseason, where you got all this draft capital? You've got a rising superstar that a lot of people are already anointing could be the best player to ever do it in the history of the NBA, and Victor Wembanyama and younger pieces around him where there's nothing but growth and the future? Or do you want a Golden State Warrior team that has the championship pedigree and probably can win a lot more games next year than that of the San Antonio Spurs?
I thought you were going to say TJD.
It's interesting. You're sort of the agent for Jonathan Kaminga, and I feel like the attorney representing one TJD. All right, we continue here on 95.7 The Game. We wrap up the show, get you ready for Utah. What do you think of the Golden State Warriors going forward? Do you want to be San Antonio in the offseason, or do you want to be Golden State? 888-957-9570. We'll take your calls as Warriors This Week continues after this.
Business. It's all the things that keep this world turning. And behind every one of these companies,
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
Final half hour of the show. Golden State Warriors get ready for the Utah Jazz. Finally, a team that, listen, there are no gimmies in the league, but Utah clearly is taking the pipe these days. Not a very good basketball team. And
just
the
go and
Warriors,
take out the J.
well, the Warriors could use a game. I mean, we're talking about load management and an aging team and how they, more than any other team, needed to get into that 6th seed because they needed the week off. You would like, ideally, for this thing to be in the bag by halftime or midway in the third quarter, so your starters and the Steph Currys and the rest of that retirement home called the Golden State Warriors can get on the bench and get some of that load management against the Utah Jazz. Hey, I got a quick shout out to I got a birthday boy. I don't typically do this. We'll take 5 seconds. His name's Oliver.
Need me to cut it for you?
I do, actually. No, the reason why is because, this is going back to the Dolphin Club, because at some point, I have to talk about myself, right? So we do this thing during the coldest months of the year, right? It's called the Polar Bear. It's from Area. Yeah, so it's the winter solstice. So from late December to late March, the coldest months in the San Francisco Bay. If you swim 40 miles, you become part of the Polar Bear Club, right? You got to be a lunatic, right, to do this. I've done it. But 40 miles in that time of the year is just, it takes, you got to be wired a little differently. This cat, happy birthday, Oliver, swam 234 miles.
Holy hell.
234 miles. I just simply call him legend. He ain't normal. All right, so shout out and happy birthday to my man.
Yeah, shout out to Oliver. 230 miles. What's that?
He died of hypothermia 2 weeks ago.
It's about halfway from here to Los Angeles. Geez, this dude swam from here to Bakersfield?
No, he is absolutely, we talk about Steph Curry and all these greats, the LeBron James. He is, I'm telling you, man, the LeBron James of the Bay Club.
And before we get back to sports, I just want to bring people in because, Dan revealed through that story he's also a coconut. And speaking of the coldest month of the year, you came in today with some Macaulay Culkin winter biking gloves that I've never seen before. Anyone who wears cut off at the fingertip wool mitts deserves to be dropped off the top of the Salesforce Tower. I've never seen anything like it.
Well, I work down at the dock. I'm a longshoreman as well. You know who made that? So so it's actually a shout out to Cecilia Lizada because the shout outs continue. My girlfriend in New York, who's in, so she's in sort of the fashion world. So she made those.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. So Cece makes these so that your fingers are available to use your cell phone. So it keeps you warm, but in New York, like you're walking around, you want to be able to access your cell phone. Well, you can't do that with a glove. You got to take the glove off and then make a call. So having the fingers free.
Well, no.
Yeah, you were looking at me like, Devone, man, what's up? Bro?
Well, I mean, you always come in and, I feel like mostly have the same fit, more for comfort than for style. And you're always coming from some club that you got up at 4:30 in the morning to go ice dunk yourself in whatever Bay Area pond you found. And so you're driving in on your bike with, by the way, do you ride a unicycle? I've never actually seen this thing.
Oh, yeah, but just the shots, man. Just absolutely combinations right to the dome of Danny.
But it is in a way a compliment because I wouldn't put anything past you. That's how, I don't know if it's cultured, but eccentric you are because you have so many different interests that we don't get to bring to the air, but yet I hear during the commercial break. So I want to give people a little insight as to Dan Devone and how
I appreciate
what goes on upstairs.
You want to know my latest interest?
And no, Uncle Loon, we have not figured out how old Dan actually is.
Here's the thing. My latest interest when it comes to the NBA is how the hell is Bronny James making himself available for the draft? I mean, what's going on? You know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Is that obviously LeBron is orchestrating this so that his son, by the way, if you're not familiar, he has just made himself eligible for the NBA draft despite averaging 5 points a game. But Bronny James is going in the NBA draft. Nobody is going to draft the guy, so he's going to be a free agent, and the Los Angeles Lakers will sign him, right? And so he'll play with his son. The question then becomes, he's never going to see the court when he's with the Lakers, right? Like, how can you even do that as a head coach? Despite, I think this thing could, as much as it's sort of a sidebar, and we sort of say it in jest, and with some level of levity tied to all of this, I think there's going to be some serious blowback on LeBron James, the Lakers, if this does come to fruition, or anybody that drafts him, Because when you're talking about roster spots at the NBA level, that's precious stuff. Just look at the Golden State Warriors. We're talking about playing 12 plays. I mean, that's valued commodity. You can't just have a guy on your team simply because of nepotism and play him on top of that because the best player on the team, the / player, GM, wants to play with his son.
No, you can get away with that in college, and even that I think is a bit of a stretch. Like, Tom Izzo's kid, I think, played for Michigan State. There's been examples, like the bad one, but like Doug McDermott is an actual player. He played for his father at Creighton, but he deserved to have that roster spot as an NBA player. Bronny James, I do think it's just a bit of a ploy to see where he's actually going to or not get drafted whatsoever. Because, Dan, it's not just an NBA roster spot. He could be taking a G League roster spot away from a kid if he's playing for the Lake Elsinore Lakers or the South Bay, the Stockton Kings. Those are valuable roster spots as well because the Lakers have already taken Caruso from the G League. They took Reeves from the G League. Heck, the Golden State Warriors sent Jordan Poole down to the G League, and he was a first-round pick. So all of those are valuable roster spots. And for a guy that averaged 5 points off the bench at USC, I mean, I haven't seen him play a ton, but I feel like you've seen him play enough to know that right now, not to say he can't be, but right now he's not an NBA player. So
he's not a college player.
You could, go transfer to a place you're going to get some run. The California Golden Bears might be able to take you and figure it out from there. But the fact, you're right, like the nepotism of a LeBron James kid is going a bit too far. And I hate to rag on the kid, but it's just, I blame LeBron more than anybody else. I don't necessarily blame Bronny. He's only taking advantage of what he can, but I don't really want to see him there.
I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to him. He's actually a well-adjusted, nice kid. I mean, from what I hear of this guy, when I hear him talk, he's a likable. I think LeBron James, as much heat as I give him and a lot of people, I mean, he's done a good job of raising, a prototypical sort of the all-American family. I think his kids, as much as you can expect, living under that sort of fishbowl environment, he's done a good job. And Bronny is, as I said, just a well-adjusted, likable kid. But you're right. This is on. You know what happens, Ev? And this is going to happen to you when your career hits that second gear and you become a network guy and you're taking limos to games and you're flying private to whatever game it is that you're going to cover when you become a network anchor.
Quit talking about me like I'm Kaminga going to be a future MVP. We don't know.
Well, here's the thing. Yeah, we do know. Here's the thing is that when you become a star, is that people start, as I like to say, putting food in your mouth and you lose perception of reality. As people are opening doors for you and everywhere you go, you're celebrated. You become somebody that's bigger than life in your own mind, and you start to live your life accordingly. And sometimes you lose touch with reality, and you can't help but become a victim of being insulated in sort of that bubble. And that's what happened to LeBron James a long time ago, that to him, this is just what you do. It's just, this is my son. He's going to leapfrog everybody else, and he's going to play with me in the NBA because I'm LeBron James and I get whatever the hell it is that I want. And to a certain degree, that's true. You lose your sense of LeBron when he was once just a normal guy, which is like maybe at age 14, your inability to sort of, see things like that of everybody else. Like, this doesn't make sense at any level. But, sensibility when you become somebody that has been catered to for so long it becomes really challenging.
Well, and before we get right back to the Warriors, I just have one last point to make. The reason why I do think it's on LeBron is because I've never heard a professional athlete make a comment about needing to or expecting to play with their child. Like Ken Griffey and Ken Griffey Jr. played together, but I don't remember reading a quote or digging through any news clippings and seeing Ken Griffey Sr. saying, "I'm playing with my kid." And that, by the way, he could have said because Ken Griffey Jr. was the chosen one. Like, he was the guy who was supposed to be a dude. Barry Bonds and his father. I don't know that there was any ever conversation publicly about expecting to play with Barry, the younger one, and that was something you could have made. So LeBron coming out and saying, like, I'm going to play with Bronny, that is dangling his own services for the benefit of his child, which is admirable, but dangling his own services to NBA teams, essentially saying, if you draft my kid, I will come play for you. That's, I think, a bit disingenuous, and that's the only reason I feel like it's at LeBron's footsteps.
Let's get back to the Golden State Warriors. I teased this at the break.
Barry and Bobby, sorry.
So you've had a good 5 minutes now, and I know you're putting this off and you're buying more time, but I asked the listening audience, who would you rather be? The Golden State Warriors this offseason in making moves for your future going forward, or would you rather be the San Antonio Spurs? Your answer, sir?
Am I assuming that neither franchise has won 4 championships in the last 10 years?
No, you can take that into consideration.
Then I would be the Warriors.
Okay.
Then I would be the Warriors. I know that you don't have a generational talent like Wembanyama, but there's also no guarantee that a generational talent is guaranteed to win championships.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what the Warriors have accomplished in the last decade for me would be enough to project the next 5 years and say I'd rather be them. I also think the Spurs are a few years away. Like, I don't all of a sudden think they're going to take an OKC-type leap next season. Wembanyama might be MVP, but that also might be a 40-win basketball team.
No, that's a good point. And I think that might be the sort of the prevailing thought here as we go forward. I just thought it'd be interesting. And I guess sort of my larger point here is, would you rather be a younger team, albeit that doesn't have the talent like that of the Golden State Warriors, but has draft picks and has a future because that young talent is only going to get more experience and you're going to be that much more relevant in a very competitive Western Conference? Or do you want to be an older team that is more plug and play, but the future, as far as the Golden State Warriors are concerned, becomes a really challenging prospect?
I would rather be the Warriors also, because I think the Spurs had this for quite some time, culture. But as we've found out, the culture is not just because of the coach. It's because of the players on the team. And I think there's more of a bridge from Curry's culture to whatever the next iteration is going to be than a Spurs team that doesn't really have one. I mean, it's funny, like, the Spurs were the poster boys for success for, 15 years.
I would push back and say Popovich has instilled a culture, even though they're losing.
Well, it's a culture of losing now, though.
Well, there's a
culture of tanking.
The culture meaning that you do things a certain way once you come into the building. Like, I think things are done a little differently in San Antonio, that there's a buy-in to their culture as opposed to maybe some of the other the majority of the teams in the NBA, even though we're losing. Maybe my interpretation of culture is a little bit different. You're thinking in terms of wins and losses.
Well, I just think we associate culture in a positive manner when you win. Like, the Warriors still have Curry, and so even if they're not necessarily winning championships, there's still a baseline of culture that I think begins and ends with 30. Now, to your point, if people are coming in and saying, well, you only got 3 or 4 more years left of him, I'd rather have Wembanyama for the next 15, then that's fair. But to me, culture is grounded in the people on the court, and the coach is an amplifier of that, which Popovich, I believe, still can be, but he doesn't have enough talent yet to really do that. So I would still rather be the Warriors moving forward than the Spurs, and who knows, maybe San Antonio can prove me wrong.
Speaking of moving forward...
Well, would you rather be... It sounds like you'd rather be the Spurs, Dan.
I just asked the questions. I don't answer. But the Golden State Warriors going forward have the Utah Jazz coming up next. The Warriors then with that big game against the Los Angeles Lakers, which is the game that I want to sort of handicap and take a look at. I'm assuming that the Golden State Warriors will be able to take care of Utah. But when we think about the Lakers and the Warriors, I think you brought up an interesting point, because a lot of people, we spend so much time focusing on the Golden State Warriors. The Los Angeles Lakers have been very good of late, and over maybe the exact same sort of span of that of the Golden State Warriors, have been playing winning basketball. In fact, when we thought about the Golden State Warriors, when Draymond came back and they had this starting lineup and they were all healthy, Paul was back, GP2, it was almost sort of a given that the Golden State Warriors are now ready to make their run. They won't be a 10 seed. They got to eye the 6 seed. But what has not happened is that teams have not fallen back to the Golden State Warriors. Now, Sacramento of late has dealt with some injuries, and they've been losing a little bit more than they have over the last couple of weeks. But the West, when you talk about basically 6 through 10, they've all no one has really sort of fallen off drastically to make the path a little bit easier for that of the Golden State Warriors.
No, and the Lakers, I mean, talk about a grueling 5-game roadie the Warriors just went 4-1 on. The Lakers just went 5-1 on a 6-game road trip that included a win at Milwaukee, as well as a couple of other poor teams. But they've faced a similar sort of sledding. I guess the last 5 games is probably where they differ from the Warriors, and that's where, again, last night's loss hurts, because if you're a game back of the Lakers with a potential tie-breaking swing on the horizon, well, the Lakers got back-to-backs tonight and tomorrow against Cleveland and Minnesota. Those are both losable games. I know they beat the Timberwolves a few weeks back, but they didn't have Rudy Gobert in that game. So there was a potentially, I don't know, there was a potential matchup set up for Tuesday where the Warriors could have just secured the 9 seed if they had beaten Dallas. And again, that's asking them to win 7 in a row, but that's where that matchup hurts. So, the Lakers are still catchable. I think the Kings are catchable. And if the Pelicans continue to slide, they might be catchable. It just does feel like with the hole that the Warriors have dug themselves, the 9-10 is in all probability where they're going to be.
And the hole that they dug themselves is really sort of where this begins and ends.
Yeah.
Because it's almost, you could almost say this is applicable to that of the Houston Rockets. Like the Rockets, made a serious push towards the end of the season, but you had played so poorly for the majority of the campaign that you knew winning 11 games, that the law of averages were going to even out at some point. That at some point you're not going to win, 20 games in a row. So at some point you're going to lose, and you can't afford to lose. And so you just wonder with the Golden State Warriors playing as well as they are right now, whether that, first of all, is enough. And secondly, can they maintain this? Is this just a hot streak and they're going to return to being sort of not mediocre, but a better than average team? Or is this a team that can maintain this winning pace right on through the postseason? I mean, are you buying that what we've seen over the last 2 weeks specifically are the Golden State Warriors going forward, or is this just them in a hot streak? And like all hot streaks, they'll come to an end.
Well, I think it is emblematic of who they are, but I mean, if you really want to play devil's advocate, I could poke holes in all their wins. I think their best one is against Dallas on Tuesday because Doncic was available for that game. But that road trip, okay, so you beat Miami, who is missing 3 starters and 4 rotation players. Orlando is a good win, but that's, the 29th ranked offense in the league. I'm just saying, like, if you wanted to do that, you could. So I think this is who the Warriors are, and what I think has staying power for them and would make me feel confident about them getting through the play-in into a first-round series is their defense. It's that Draymond looks like he's playing at his best level for this current version of him. It looks like Wiggins, even though he's been up and down offensively, he is a two-way player that you can potentially count on. And Trace Jackson-Davis is a guy at the center position that offers a different dynamic to their offense, but also is a great backup as a defender for Draymond. So what that front court is doing, like the best 3-man lineup defensively the Warriors have, is Wiggins, Draymond, and TJD. That's what I feel really good about. In addition to Curry, for stretches, still being able to take over games, like he scored 14 fourth-quarter points last night against Dallas. He didn't hit maybe the go-ahead shot, but he hit a clutch basket to tie the game in crunch time, and unfortunately, Clay couldn't hit the game winner. So I think last night is where we're going to see the Warriors, which is, again, looking at the big picture, they're going to be in crunch time down the stretch and in ball probability in these play-in games. They played 45 clutch games this year. That's ridiculous. But they're 22-23. So it's a coin flip. Will they win one of those play-in games? Perhaps. If it's another clutch game, will they lose? The evidence says they might. So I think they're playing their best basketball, and that's really all that they can control. I just don't believe in the long run it's going to be good enough to go where all the fans are accustomed to seeing them.
And before we get out of here, I do want to talk about the refereeing and sort of what has happened since the All-Star break. Because it's clear that this is now, whether it was an edict that was handed down from Adam Silver, but you can see collectively from game to game that the refs are letting them quote-unquote play. And it is such a more enjoyable product. Like, this is the sort of basketball as a viewer, just from an entertainment standpoint, not having the stop and the starting and disrupting flow, that we're all on board with. At least I am. I'm assuming you're the same way.
Yeah, I thought last night was a great game.
Oh, perfect game.
I don't think that game happens if there's ticky-tack foul calls.
But with that being said, I hate to go after my man Steph, but you can't be whining about calls if we're going to let, if it's going to be, because I think it really benefits the Golden State Warriors with their style of play, that letting them play. The Warriors are more than a physical team. They're more physical than I think a lot of people give them credit for. But Steph, you can't. I know that he doesn't get his just due when it comes to fouls. But if we're letting them play through contact, I mean, you got to put away the whining. Not Steph specifically, but just players in general. Like at some point, it's got to be understood that there's a new sheriff in town, and this is the way we're doing things. And I think it's beneficial to everybody. So I think hopefully as a result of that, players will do less complaining. And Steph likes to feel at times, I know, the whole world is conspiring against him. And I think part of that is just, no, these are the new rules that hopefully we're all in favor of.
Well, I don't think it... I mean, I wouldn't consider Steph a whiner by any means, especially compared to 98% of this league. But... the new rules...
Doncic is a whiner.
Yes, Doncic is a whiner, and he was looking for calls all night long on Tuesday. Every time he took a shot, he looked up at the ref and threw his hands up, and that's what he does. Curry doesn't do that. And I do think that Curry might get, I don't know, in some games, an unfair whistle for his stature. But the reality is, you're right. The new rules or edict from the commissioner has benefited the way the Warriors can play defense. It has not benefited Steph Curry. And I think it's a combination of him being a little older, in addition to teams are able to get more physical with him. And for a guy who may or may not have already got a poor whistle, it's not going to get any better. Like, it's just not. So I don't think I think there is a correlation between these new rules being passed down, how you can play defense, and Curry's average is dipping a bit.
No, that's a good point. And I do see from time to time that they get back to sort of the head-scratching, ticky-tack call. So it's got to be, it's got to be much more sort of scaled, right? Like, either we're doing this or we're not. Like, there's still that, the awkward call where a guy plays perfect defense, moves his feet, and just has his hand raised, and a guy will lower his shoulder and initiate contact. I'm talking about the offensive player, and then the defensive player will get that whistle. I mean, that still makes no sense, and you still see that from time to time. So
I like it because it's been more representative of, I think, what we see in the postseason, and I just like that product more. I think it's more competitive. I think, for example, last night was a really physical basketball game in which the Warriors' toughness was on full display as much as the Mavs. And while that might be more taxing and more effortful for basketball players, that's the kind of product that I want to watch, because you are truly seeing how much guts a particular player has. And you see it for 2 months in the postseason if the Warriors are in it or not. So the fact that it's more representative of what we get in the postseason, to me, is just better for the brand of basketball.
Well, that's part of the problem to begin with, is that why do they wait to the postseason? And they'll tell you that. Well, we'll let them play in the postseason. Or how often do you hear, we'll eat the whistle in the fourth quarter. We'll let them play in the fourth quarter. Let them play the whole damn game. Let them play the whole damn season, for crying out loud.
Oh, really quickly before we get out of here, they didn't swallow the whistle in the UConn-Iowa game.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, you and I were talking about the break.
But that
Come
was,
on, man.
I'm sorry. It might have been a correct block call or offensive foul by the lay of the land, rule of the law, but I'm sorry. I did not like that call whatsoever.
You got to eat your whistle there. What are you thinking? You cannot decide that game, which is what it did. And that's the problem. Like, let that play out. There's 9 seconds to go. As a fan, I want to see whether you can win this game, dethrone Iowa, knock off the Caitlin Clark story. What's going to happen? But to have a referee on a judgmental, illegal screen decide who wins and loses that contest, that's the last thing any of us signed up for.
I mean, it's the same reason why I don't want to see a PI on the last play of a football game. Like, swallow your whistle, let the players decide it. If there's something absolutely egregious, then you're forced to make the call. But for something as I don't know, I just thought ticky-tack is that was pretty ridiculous. And you're right, Dan, it wasn't even a play that decided the outcome of the possession. It was just the beginning of a possession, which I wholeheartedly disagree with.
Is it bad that I'm kind of like getting in the camp of wanting to see Caitlin Clark get knocked off? I love her. She has been an ambassador for that sport. Matter of fact, this is funny. So we were sitting around.
That was Team UConn.
There was a group of us. We were sitting around. It was 4 guys, just to let you know, that were sitting around during the break. And I said, we were talking about women's basketball. We were talking about the NCAA Final Four. And I'm like, you know what? If this was 10 or 15 years, would we be having this conversation about women's basketball at the NCAA level? And there's a good chance we wouldn't. So I think a lot of that is attributed to the sport, but specifically to one Caitlin Clark, who's been the perfect ambassador. But
the women's game just has stars. I think that's why you're talking about it with your boys more than you ever have, is because there's stars in the women's basketball game in college that are just not in the men's game. Like, the most notable men's basketball star left in the Final Four is probably DJ Burns. You think he's going to play in the league? I don't know. Zach Edey, I don't think he's going to be an NBA star. Whereas Caitlin Clark, Paige Beckers, Juju Watkins, Angel Reese, there's legitimate stardom in women's basketball that there's never been before, and they can actually go play at the next level, whereas the men's game, it feels like they're running into a wall at some point.
All right, with that, 5-0, I see it. I went the whole show in the final 10 seconds, let Curry jacket. We got a jacket in there before we round things out. All right, for my man, Evan Giddings, this is Dan Devone. We'll see you back here again for another edition of Warriors This Week. Until then, don't forget, you got the pregame show tomorrow?
Yes, pregame, 4:30, Warriors Live, Utah, coming to Chase Center.
That'll do it for us. We'll see you back here tomorrow for Warriors basketball. Evan will, at least. Warriors in Utah right here on 95.7 The Game. Until then, so long, everybody.
I'm what you might call very good at hide and seek. This one time, my parents had to round up the whole